Hey guys, tonight we slip into a low-lit Victorian bedchamber, the soft glow of beeswax candles dancing along floral wallpaper. You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to mothballs, but tonight, you unravel the cozy mysteries of bedtime remedies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, share your location and local time in the comments. I'll try to guess your time zone. Spoiler, it's not always what you expect. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sink into a canopy bed draped with heavy damask curtains, the scent of lavender sachets drifting through velvet folds. The faint crackle of a candle wick reminds you that darkness in Victorian England was far from absolute. Gaslight in the streets replaced the sun, but inside, households leaned on flickering flames and the occasional whale oil lamp to fill the shadows. You press your head into a plush pillow surrounded by feather-stuffed bolster rolls, their comforting weight a relic of an era when synthetic fill was science fiction. Outside, muffled carriage wheels clatter over cobblestones slicked from morning's rain, carrying shoppers and coal merchants alike to their final stops for the day. Inside, you listen to the ritual hush that descends at nightfall, distant church bells marking the hour, the creak of floorboards as servants finish securing windows, and the distant hiss of a neighbor's final lamp guttering out. This hush is the prelude, the grand overture, to the Victorian insomnia epidemic that grips every class. From soot-faced chimney sweeps to aristocrats swathed in silk, you draw the curtains tighter, half to keep out the night chill, half to quiet the sense of London's ceaseless bustle. The wick's glow dances over ornate wallpaper depicting pastoral scenes, shepherds tending flocks. Yet here you are more concerned with the flock of nightingales that you haven't met yet. Historians still argue whether these painted scenes were meant to soothe the mind, or merely displayed the homeowner's wealth. A gentle draft from the crack in the window carries the aroma of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery and the faint, acrid sting of coal smoke. You tuck in under a heavy quilt, the fabric cool against your skin. In your hand, you hold a small porcelain bowl containing a mixture of lavender petals and crushed hops and herbal sachet, believed to coax cloak-eyed sleepers into dreamland. This mainstream use of hops in sleep remedies was well documented by mid-century physicians. Yet you can't help but wonder, was it the herbs or the hush of the night that truly made eyelids heavy? Through the gauzy bed canopy you watch the candle flame shimmy, throwing gentle shadows across the ceiling. You hear your own breathing settle into quiet rhythm while your mind drifts to tales of bedside nightingales, those feathered therapists, as some tongue-in-cheek Victorian doctors called them, whose songs were said to tame the most stubborn cases of insomnia. It's a quirky tidbit that doctors once penned elaborate instructions for bird placement, choir-like arrangements above the headboard or perched discreetly on nearby mantles for optimal serenading. Your eyelids heavy as damask, curtains around. You imagine a small brass birdcage hung just so its door unlocked, allowing the nightingale freedom to flutter closer if the mood struck. The idea seems delightfully eccentric, yet you know this wasn't confined to penny dreadful anecdotes. Well-to-do households across Britain experimented with live avian therapy in their quest for restful slumber. Historians still argue whether these creatures were more effective than laudanum or opium-influenced syrups that circulated among upper-crust socialites. You flip one finger to extinguish the candle and for a moment, absolute darkness envelops you. It's easy to forget how pitch-black evenings could become when smag-choked gas lamps failed or servant quarters barred open windows for warmth. In that instant, every creak and whisper in the house feels amplified. You draw the quilt higher, grateful for the faint glow of a small nightlight flickering behind floral glass. With the light's amber halo dancing against the headboard, you find an odd comfort in knowing nightingales would softly chant even in utter darkness as sleep beckons. You recall the ancient belief carried into Victorian sensibilities that gentle sounds could lull the spirit to rest. Though electricity would not arrive in households until the late 1880s, people relied on natural methods. The hush of rustling drapes, the whisper of silk nightgowns brushing the floor, and the twitter of carefully curated songbirds. Your breathing lengthens, matching the imagined tempo of a nightingale's lullaby. 3 light jokes drift through your half-conscious mind as the narrative of the past folds around you, imagining the butler tiptoeing in slippers to feed the nightingale a midnight snack, perhaps a grape, because birds apparently had a taste for luxury. Picturing a family pet cat rolling its eyes at the fancy bird show, and conjuring a nobleman convinced that each chirp was personally addressing his insomnia. These vignettes settle in like soft cushions, neutralizing the edges of any stray anxieties. Your pillow cradles your head as the mixture of herbs and soft narrative work in concert. In these moments you feel a gentle hush descend, comfortable, familiar, and oddly intimate. Here, in this candlelit sanctuary of textile and whisper, the modern hustle fades. You drift cocooned in layers of history into the tender space between wakefulness and dreams. You drift deeper into the hush as London's foggy streets outside your window seem to press against the panes, carrying whispers of a city too busy to sleep. By the mid-Victorian era, around the 1850s, physicians were documenting an actual insomnia. Epidemic reports show that nearly 1 in 3 urban dwellers confessed to chronic sleeplessness in local medical surveys. Even the bustling docks, with their clanging cranes and creaking timbers, couldn't compete with the inner restlessness that gripped factory workers, governesses, and aristocrats alike. You imagine yourself navigating narrow alleys slick with coal soot, the air thick and tasting faintly of iron. A distant steam whistle calls out like a summons to tireless industry, while nearby, the glow of gas lamps fragments through the gloom in little pinpricks. Inside, you're cocooned within thick drapes that try and often fail to mute the nocturnal bustle. Some Victorians even staged midnight sleep salons to drown out the city with collective lullabies. Though few admitted on the morning after whether it actually helped, mainstream doctors prescribed laudanum, digitalis, and even chloral hydrate as sleep aids, potent chemicals that risked dependency. Yet the highly prescribed laudanum, containing opium, was blamed for a rash of accidental overdoses, prompting cautious families to seek more natural routes. You can almost smell the bitter tincture soaked into handkerchiefs, passed discreetly from apothecary jars to parched lips. Historians still argue whether these chemical aids did more harm than good, given reports of groggy mornings and blurred days that followed. In parlors across the city, you hear gossip about eccentric remedies. Some ladies drew demure circles on the ceiling and counted them backward, while fringe enthusiasts claim that stuffing their cravats with pulverized sheep's wool summoned a soporific cloud around the head. You might raise an eyebrow at that. But wool-scented sachets were a real niche fad. People believed sheep were so well rested. Borrowing a bit of their lanolin could lull you to dreamland. It's a quirky tidbit that survives an obscure diary. Entries, half-inked with frustration over a sleepless week. The soot-streaked windows of tenement homes reveal silhouettes of families huddled around small coal fires. Fathers in tattered tailcoats perch on wooden stools, Googling, figuratively speaking, the best method to quell their spinning thoughts. If only they had Google back then, you muse, we'd know which bedtime tea works best. You sense a modern aside creeping in, a wink across centuries, linking your world's caffeine-fueled insomnia apps to their chalk-hand charcoal sleep logs. Meanwhile, well-to-do households experimented with more tactile solutions. Rosary-like chains of lavender and hops tied above the headboard, perfumed gloves tucked under pillows, even mandatory no-thought hours before bed, enforced by watchful governesses who blew out candles at the precise stroke. You feel the weight of that strict schedule, imagining a benevolent schoolmistress tiptoeing in to dim the lights, while a parlour-maid hushedly brushed hair-starched nightcaps on a squeaky bedpost. Despite the variety of approaches, the pervasive sense was that urban life itself was the culprit. Nocturnal clutter of horse-drawn carriages, street hawkers shouting final calls, and the constant belch of factory chimneys fed an unending adrenaline loop. You might chuckle at the idea that soot pollution contributed to insomnia, but Vic genuinely blamed London's superfogs for exacerbating restless nights. Historians still argue whether environmental factors outweighed social stresses in sparking the crisis. Your senses heighten. The draft under the door carries a swirl of dishwater brine from a nearby fishmonger, the tinny clink of a spoon against a teacup, and the low drone of a distant clock tower marking 11:15 p.m. In one corner, a cope of evening papers lies half-freed headlines, proclaiming the latest steam engine disasters and scandals among the gentry. You picture a weary seamstress flicking through those pages, her mind too revved to succumb to sleep to combat the urban din. Some inventive souls built sleep igloos, tiny canvas tents rigged to bed frames intended to isolate sleeper from every rattling hinge and chatty cousin. Only a handful survived the century, and most were smaller than a communion booth, making grown adults feel like apologies to children's toy forts. Yet this fringe invention underscores the Victorian penchant for gadgetry when natural remedies seemed insufficient. It's almost delightful, imagining you curled inside a tight canvas cocoon, breathing in the stale scent of canvas and yesterday's upholstery. By 1870, public health reformers decried the mass insomnia as a national crisis, lobbying Parliament to regulate factory hours and street lighting. They argued that curfews on gas lamps and noise ordinances could reclaim nighttime silence. You sense the tension between progress and rest, the very engines of industrial revolution, fueling economic growth while stealing the city's ability to dream. You catch yourself nodding, recognizing echoes of your own 24/7's digital culture, a polite reminder that every era wrestles with balancing productivity and repose. As your mind drifts, you conjure 3 light jokes for company, picturing a gentleman in a top hat crawling into a makeshift igloo and shouting, "I feel like a giant hamster," imagining a seamstress using a feather duster as a bedtime companion because, why not? And reflecting on a wealthy matron snootily telling her neighbors that her Nightingale duet was far superior to the rowdy fishmongers. Each joke lands softly, cushioning you against any residual tension. Your breath settles into a calming rhythm as the imagined city's clamor fades into a distant, comforting murmur like a half-remembered lullaby. You rest in the knowledge that these sleep struggles aren't unique. They tie you to restless souls of the past, all reaching for rest under the same starless sky. And as you lie there, you feel that even amidst soot and steam, the Victorian pursuit of sleep through chemicals, contraptions, and eventually lived Nightingales was a testament to humanity's timeless yearning for peaceful slumber. You slip into a softly lit drawing room where the velvet drapes are drawn against the night air, and the faint scent of rosewater mingles with the flicker of candelabra. This is one of the famed sleep salons that began appearing in London's upscale neighborhoods around the 1860s, where curious elites gathered to trade hush-hush remedies and indulge in what they called cotton-soft illusions. You can almost feel the plush settees enveloping you as you take your seat among gentlefolk in pastel cravats and silk slippers. These salons were more than mere soirees, they were social laboratories for rest. Mainstream physicians of the time even recommended attending such gatherings as a complement to medical treatments, arguing that communal relaxation could ease nerves before slumber. In fact, by 1865, at least a dozen aristocratic hostesses openly advertised their nightly salons. In subtle, ink-printed leaflets slipped into society columns, historians still argue whether these events genuinely improved sleep or simply offered a soothing placebo effect. Your hostess, Lady Everton, glides between guests, offering small porcelain cups of dream tonic, a mild blend of rose petals, hops, and a whisper of brandy. You raise the cup to your lips and taste the delicate sweetness, a cozy echo of the lavender sachet you nestled under your pillow back in section 1. A modern aside winks at you. It's the 19th century equivalent of a trendy wellness latte, minus the Instagram filter in one corner. A group's attention fixes on a velvet-draped stage where a delicate contraption hums on early soundscape box that plays looped recordings of murmuring brooks and pastoral birds. The device, you learn, is fueled by wind-up clockwork mechanisms, and it was showcased at the Great Exhibition of 1851. Just beyond the mellifluous trickle, a small compartment emits gentle wafts of chamomile steam through perforated panels. You inhale deeply, the warm mist brushing your cheeks like a friend's soft goodnight whisper. But not everything here is orthodox. One lady leans in conspiratorially to recount a fringe remedy, sleeping inside a giant silk cocoon stuffed with night-scented honeysuckle. It was said that this wrapped you so intimately in floral embrace, you'd drift off mid-sniff. You stifle a grinner. Imagine the laundry bill on that one. Yet you note that Victorian magazines published detailed how-tos for homegrown honeysuckle sleep pods, complete with gardening tips for what they dubbed dream vines. The air is rich with gentle laughter as guests share their most unusual cures. Some swore by wearing pastel gloves scented with crushed violet petals, others by melting beeswax on bare feet and letting the warmth lull them. A baroness confesses she once tried serenading herself with a handheld ocarina tuned to a single O note. She claimed the drone mimicked a mother's lullaby. It's a quirky tidbit that seems straight out of fiction yet was detailed in an 1872 Gentleman's Magazine. You recline on a chaise longue, feeling the soft give of embroidered cushions beneath you. Nearby, a butler in white gloves tips a small night lamp so its glow doesn't intrude into your peripheral vision. The hush in the room is orchestrated, muted footsteps on thick rugs, the soft rustle of silk gowns, and the barely audible click of porcelain china. It's as if you've stepped into a cocoon of sound and sensation, carefully engineered to cradle you toward sleep. Amid the gentle hum, conversations drift to scholarly debates. Did these sleep salons arise from genuine concern for urban health, or were they another status symbol for the idle rich? Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these gatherings signified a cultural shift toward self-care or merely reinforced social exclusivity. You sense the tension in polite voices. Some insist it was therapeutic. Others grumble that salons were just another excuse to gossip under the guise of health. Your fingertips brush the velvet edge of a low table holding an array of delicate remedies. Tiny vials of mulberry syrup, porcelain jars of lavender jelly, and rose-studded night masks fashioned from the softest muslin. A young viscount leans forward to demonstrate a contraption that looks like a miniature guillotine only. It slices thin strips of linen tape, each imbued with valerian oil. He calls it the serene ribbon, and guests gently tie them around their temples, believing the scent would seep directly into dream channels. It's a fringe practice, gleefully recorded in personal diaries, and you can't help but wonder if they smelled more like an herb shop than a bedroom. 3 light jokes float through your mind, picturing a duchess accidentally knocking herself out with a wind-up soundbox that played nothing but church bells, imagining an entire salon of guests chasing runaway honeysuckle vines, and visualizing the poor butler stuck refilling scented water fountains at 2 a.m., muttering, "I joined to serve tea, not spritz dreams." Each joke is a soft pillow of amusement, keeping any tension at bay. You close your eyes, letting the combined lull of tinkling ocarinas, whispered gossip, and rosewater haze settle deep in your limbs. Your breathing slows to a velvet rhythm, matching the gentle tick-tick of the soundscape box. In this plush sanctuary of cotton-soft illusions, you feel the weight of the modern world lift away. No soot, no steam whistles, just a timeless quest For rest. As the salon's soft orchestra swells and ebbs around you, you drift on the promise of a more serene night. Even if these gatherings were more fashion than function, their legacy lives on in our quiet spas and mindfulness apps. You realize that the human desire for communal comfort at bedtime transcends centuries, knitting a thread from candlelit parlors to today's group meditation sessions. Here, in the hush of Lady Everton's drawing room, you find yourself gently drifting cocooned, not in honeysuckle but in shared ritual, laughter, and the hush of collective exhale. You wake from your rosewater reverie to find the scene shifting ever so gently. Now you're perched on a plush settee in a parlor brimming with curious contraptions, brass telescopes poised at wide windows, bisected bird specimens pinned to velvet boards, and shelves groaning under leather-bound tomes of avian wonders. By the mid-19th century, Britain's middle and upper classes had fallen head over heels for the study of birds. Victorian ornithology was more than a pastime. It was practically a badge of genteel respectability. You lean forward as a mahogany cabinet is swung open, revealing drawers of pastel-hued birdskins meticulously labeled in spidery copperplate script. It's a mainstream fact that, in 1858, the British Ornithologists' Union was founded, Britain's first professional society dedicated to birds, and membership soared among enthusiastic amateurs eager to document the natural world. You imagine the thrill they felt, sketchbook in hand, racing across moors at dawn to catch a glimpse of a rare lapwing before breakfast could interrupt. In the corner, a lady in a cerulean silk gown delicately traces illustrations of finches in a leather-bound sketchbook. Fringe hobbyists even trained pet canaries to hold tiny paintbrushes in their beaks, coaxing them to dab watercolor dots onto mini canvases. It's a quirky tidbit that survives in obscure family letters, where proud matriarchs showcased avian artwork alongside elegant sonnets. Historians still argue whether these creative diversions truly advanced scientific knowledge or merely satisfied whimsical vanity. Your fingertips graze a brass specimen box filled with exotic eggs, each resting in buttersoft cotton. A hostess passes by, carefully removing a porcelain cup brimming with jasmine tea. She explains that drawing eggs required mastering not only the fragile art of watercolor but also overcoming Victorian taboos against removing eggs. From bird nest, a practice increasingly criticized by early conservationists, some contemporaries even argued that rampant egg-collecting endangered native species, laying the groundwork for Britain's first wildlife protection laws in the 1860s. You settle into a velvet wingback chair, candlelight dancing across delicate porcelain figurines of songbirds in mid-tweet. Across the room, a well-worn copy of John James Audubon's The Birds of America lies open, its giraffe-sized plates showcasing vivid life-sized watercolors. You recognize that Audubon's work inspired countless parlors to host illustrated evenings, where guests passed around magnifying lenses and read aloud exotic bird descriptions over slices of cucumber sandwiches. It's almost a quaint imagine today's Twitter birders sipping Earl Grey, while live streaming a warbler sighting. A modern aside nudges you. Think of Instagram influencers showing off their pet budgets, then layer on top a sense of earnest scientific pursuit and candlelit charm. You suppress a smile as you picture a Viscount setting up a hand-cranked Camaraeus. Those existed to capture action shots of wagtails landing on windowsills. 3 light jokes flutter through your mind, picturing a pigeon trying to fool an ornithologist's photo, imagining a butler badly mispronouncing Latin names as he dusts the cabinets, and suspecting that the sketching canaries secretly preferred gossip to watercolor. A hush falls as a gentleman debuts his feather atlas, a meticulously bound folio of pressed feathers sourced from across the empire, peacock plumes from India, quetzal tail feathers from Guatemala, and ostrich plumage from South Africa. Each is arranged like a kaleidoscope of color and pattern. You note the undercurrent of colonial reach. These specimens wouldn't have made it into parlors without networks of collectors in distant lands. Historians still argue whether Victorian bird study ultimately fostered global conservation or merely fueled imperial exploitation of wildlife. You lean back, inhaling the subtle aroma of beeswax, old paper, and damp earth, a sensory cocktail that transports you to a Dukeist woodland clearing. In a nearby alcove, a small brass cage holds a live zebrafinch. The bird's tiny chirps punctuate scholarly discourse on wing morphology. It's a callback to that soundscape box you encountered in Section 3, except here the melody is raw and unscripted. A subtle irony warms you in their quest for perfect scientific observation. Victorians never tired of the authentic trills of living song. A hostess glides around offering botanical sketches of bird-attracting shrubs for home gardens holders of lilac, honeysuckle, and mockingbird-friendly azaleas. You recall the yen for honeysuckle sleep pods and imagine replacing those with a bed of wildflowers pressing petals into the quilt. You might wrinkle your nose at the pollen, but Victorians insisted that birds and blooms were partners in slumber, nature's lullaby amplified by fragrant blossoms. As conversation turns to scholarly debate, a professor stands to deliver a lecture on whether Victorian ornithologists advanced taxonomy or muddied the science with amateur enthusiasm. You catch the phrase. Historians still argue whether the democratization of bird study enriched ornithology or diluted its rigor, and nod in silent agreement. The tension is palpable. Earnest observation versus scientific discipline. Light laughs trickle around you when someone recounts a runaway pet magpie that once squawked Otto von Bismarck's name repeatedly, causing an uproar at a diplomatic salon. You imagine the awkward moment when the bird was returned with an apology letter from the Prussian ambassador. It's a gentle reminder that even in solemn study, whimsy found its way like a feather drifting onto a serious lecture. Your eyelids grow heavy as hosts begin dimming lower lamps. In the fading glow, you see stacks of bird journals tied with ribbons, annual publications filled with sighting tallies, woodcut illustrations, and essays on migratory patterns. These newsletters were the original bird blogs, eagerly awaited by subscribers, as if each issue contained the secret to perfect sleep. You sensed that the meticulous recording of wing beats and beak shapes was for some a soothing ritual. Tracing wing veins on paper offered a kind of meditation as hypnotic as any lullaby. You rise to stretch, brushing against an embroidered bird cushion perched on a chaise lounge, an echo from Section 3's soundscape box, now transposed into textile form. The overlap of bird imagery and sleep rituals tugs at your mind, knitting the narrative thread tighter. You take a final sip of jasmine tea while gazing through tall windows at the moonlit gardens, where nightingales might soon sing an accompaniment to your own dreams. As you sink back into the wing-back chair, you feel the hushed parlor lull you further toward slumber. Even if today's sleep apps rely on looping recordings, the Victorian love affair with live and preserved birds taught the world that there's profound comfort in observing nature's rhythms, whether you believe it was a scientific breakthrough or a social fad. The legacy of Victorian ornithology remains, inviting each new generation to listen, record, and, perhaps, drift off to the gentle flutter of wings. You shift in your dimly lit bedroom as the faint scent of beeswax and lavender lingers, and consider how Victorians tackled sleepless nights before they ever dreamed of bedside nightingales. Mainstream physicians of the era peddled a veritable pharmacy of soporifics. Laudanum drops and opium tincture, first formulated in the 17th century, were dosed by careful spoonfuls, while chloral hydrate and bromide compounds made promising debuts in mid-century apothecaries. You can almost taste the bitter tangs of laudanum warming your throat, a remedy so ubiquitous that by the 1860s, every London chemist's windowsill boasted neatly labeled amber bottles promising restful repose in tiny, tantalizing doses. Yet, these standard solutions often felt like blunt instruments. You imagine a genteel governess, with quivering hands, obligingly swallowing a teaspoon of chloral hydrate as she perches on a high-back chair, only to awake at dawn bleary-eyed and disoriented. Historians still argue whether chemical sedatives did more damage to Victorian health than they cured insomnia, given contemporary reports describing trembling limbs and hazy memories more akin to hangovers than peaceful dreams. Seeking gentler alternatives, Victorians turned to more tactile comforts. Feather-stuffed pillows were considered both a luxury and a therapeutic must-have. You run your fingers along a plush pillowcase, picturing feathers plucked from geese farmed in Norfolk marshes, each plume meant to cradle your head with just the right cushiony resilience. Apparently, the firmness of goose down was thought to mimic the natural curvature of the spine, encouraging restful alignment. Yet doctors' journals debated whether too soft cushions caused neck strains worse than a night spent staring at the ceiling. Beyond pillows, you learn of fringe enthusiasts who went so far as to concoct moonbeam pillows, small satchels of netted silk filled with pulverized sheep's wool, lavender, hop blossoms, and in a particularly quirky twist, a pinch of ground snail mucus. According to obscure letters in a medical society archive, snail mucus was believed to carry the moon's soothing properties, transferring lunar calm into your dreams. You stifle a grin at the thought of midnight snail farming, imagining Victorian gardeners lurking by moonlight, coaxing gastropods into yielding their precious, slimy essence. Doctors recommended tinctures of valerian root, swallowed neat or infused into mild port wines for a friendlier flavor. You picture a dinner table where port is served not for merriment but as a gateway to slumber. Modern-day wine and crayons party yields nothing on that image. Yet valerian's earthy aroma, described by some as akin to sweaty socks, could put even the most determined insomniac to sleep. Historians still argue whether valerian's effects were primarily psychological placebo or rooted in genuine pharmacological action. You lift a small glass vial labeled soporific drops and imagine adding a single pipette of poppy essence to a bedtime cup of warm milk. The practice was so mainstream that children's books cautioned young readers about drinking too much poppy, lest they dream eternal dreams. Fringe herbalists suggested combining poppy essence with a drop of rosewater and a whisper of brandy, an early iteration of the bedtime cocktail that people still debate in fancy cocktail bars today. One diarist recorded stuffing a nightcap with tiny pockets of crushed hops and dried elderflower, believing that these blossoms summoned a natural drug. You picture her nodding off mid-conversation, stray petals tumbling from her cap onto a lace pillowcase, It's a charming vignette until you imagine the cleanup. A cradle of wilted blossoms to vacuum come morning. Tether stuffed bolsters were paired with steam inhalations. Full-bodied metal stands behind the bed held brass kettles of boiling water infused with eucalyptus and chamomile. Steam hissed through perforated lids, creating a humid microclimate that promised to soften nasal passages and lull the chest. You might wrinkle your nose at the must-have steam tent like camping indoors, but Victorians swore by it. Historians still argue whether the benefits of humidification outweighed the risks of scalding limbs or exacerbating damp chills in poorly insulated rooms. In corners of fine homes, you'd find scented warming pans tucked between sheets. Smooth iron pans filled with glowing embers slid beneath feather covers to radiate gentle heat. You feel the imagined warmth creeping along your legs, dispelling any residual chill. Yet apothecary manuals warned of fire hazards, debating whether these pans were comforting or potential catalysts for disastrous bedroom blazes. 3 light jokes flutter at the edge of your mind, picturing a butler brought in to refill warming pans and accidentally setting off the household alarms, imagining a governess snoring louder than her laudanum-addled pupils, and picturing a matron exhaling in valiant defiance against the earthy bouquet of valerian-infused port. As you recline, the flicker of candlelight plays across your pillow, and you sense the comforting weight of history pressing gently on your eyelids. Whether you prefer opiate tinctures or feathered bolsters, the Victorian quest for perfect sleep was a blend of chemistry, craftsmanship, and a dash of whimsy, elements that, centuries later, still mirror our own nighttime rituals. You're tucked under your warming pan-heated quilt as the echo of the steam tent's hiss gently fades, leaving room for a new wonder to unfold. The Nightingale Lullaby. The mid-1870s, a physician named Dr. Thomas Grant stumbled upon a revelation while treating a patient with chronic insomnia and labored breathing. He'd placed a small cage of canaries in the room as a cheerful distraction, but in one particularly sleepless night, he introduced a rare captured nightingale. Instead of fretful chirps, it sang a soft, undulating melody that seemed to synchronize with the patient's slow inhalations. His contemporaries rushed to publish case studies mainstream fact, claiming that the bird's song reduced rattling coughs and eased restless limbs, a phenomenon Grant documented in the London Medical Review of 1878. You can almost hear the flute-like notes drifting through candlelit hallways as you imagine Grant perched on a stool beside a 4-poster bed, notebook in hand, scribbling observations while the patient's breaths lengthen into a peaceful rhythm. This discovery sent ripples through both medical and social circles. Suddenly, genteel bird enthusiasts weren't content to admire plumage or catalog eggs. They sought avian voices promising therapeutic promise. Historians still argue whether Grant's observations were scientifically rigorous or merely anecdotal sparks fanned by Victorian romanticism. By the time the nightingale craze truly took flight, urban birdcatchers had developed clandestine methods to trap the songbirds at twilight. You picture muddy fields outside London's parks, nets strung between lampposts at dusk, and young apprentices stuffing velvet-lined boxes with moss to house their fragile cargo. A quirky tidbit from a dealer's journal reveals that some catchers taught their pigeons to deliver messages about captured nightingales, sort of like feathery telegraph operators, though skeptics called it fanciful gossip. As you settle deeper into your feather-stuffed bolsters, you appreciate how the Nightingale Lullaby represented a merger of 2 earlier pursuits: the herbal sachets you'd tucked under your pillow in Section 1, and the steam-infused sleep tents of Section 5. Instead of lavender vapor dancing around your face, you had living melody swirling through the shadows, wrapping around your senses like a velvet scarf. A playful aside crosses your mind. It's like swapping your white noise app for a live DJF. That DJ wore feathers and preferred moonlight to spotlights. The first documented therapeutic cage was designed by an inventive apothecary, Emily Fairchild, whose workshop smelled of rosemary and beeswax. She crafted a brass vessel with sound-amplifying vents and a removable tray for fresh water and mealworms. According to her daughter's diary, Emily claimed the nightingale's song could entrap the humors of the mind, a phrase that today sounds like a throwback to ancient humoral theory. Historians still argue whether Fairchild's ventilated cages genuinely boosted song quality or mainly served as ornamental curiosities in parlors that craved novelty. You feel the brush of reality slip away as you imagine visiting Fairchild's dimly lit shop on Hosier Lane, where shelves curved under the weight of exotic spices, powdered roots, and mechanical bird cages gleaming under gaslight. The air smelled of chamomile tea brewing over a low flame and the faint, sweet temps of birdseed. You can almost see Emily gently coaxing a newly arrived nightingale from its traveling crate, whispering soft assurances as she tunes her listening. Thence to the bird's first notes, Yet the therapeutic use of live birds wasn't without controversy. Critics questioned the ethics of caging wild songbirds for human comfort. Early animal welfare advocates argued that forcing a creature to sing within city confines was cruel and bizarre. A fringe pamphlet circulated in 1882, suggesting that nightingales wept themselves into silence, their voices breaking under the strain of captivity. You raise an eyebrow at this image, a tiny bird composing its own ballad of despair. Though you suspect it was more Victorian melodrama than ornithological fact. Back in your bedroom, the rustle of your quilt reminds you of the velvet-lined boxes that once held these feathered therapists. You imagine yourself leaning forward to catch each note, your chest rising and falling in time with the bird's trills. The world outside melts. No soot-choked fog, no midnight carriage rumble. Melody. 3 light jokes drift through your mind, picturing a butler trying to shush a symphony of irate sparrows, jealous of the nightingale's solo. Imagining a snooty guest criticizing the tempo as too sprightly for bedtime, and crafting a mental postcard from Grant. Dear colleague, your cough has left the building. Regards, T. Grant. There were even morning after reports of individuals waking with vivid dreams of moonlit gardens, believing the nightingale's melody had guided them through an enchanted forest. A quirky marginal note in Grant's personal copy of the review suggests he once found rose petals strewn across a patient's bedding, perhaps an unplanned floral tribute inspired by the bird's nocturne. It's details like these that blur the line between rigorous observation and the fanciful, illustrating why historians still argue whether these accounts represent genuine sleep therapy or romanticized anecdotes designed to sell Nightingale. Cages. You feel the nocturne echo fade, leaving a serene silence that feels like a gentle hug around your mind. The memory of that first Nightingale's song nestles in your thoughts like a whispered promise that within wildness lies calm, if only channeled just so. As you nestle deeper into your silk-lined quilt, you sense a soft alignment of breath and memory. The Nightingale lullaby wasn't just novelty, it reflected a deeper Victorian belief in harmonizing nature's rhythms with human health. Your eyelids droop as you recall the soft hiss of steam, the earthy scent of valerian, and now the silken chord of a nightingale song. The interplay of steam tent warmth and the bird's trill marks a pivotal moment, humanity bending toward nature's lullaby for the simplest of desires to rest. You close your eyes, letting this trilled harmony guide you toward that thin threshold where history becomes dream. You drift into a restless haze, and the scene shifts to misty twilight fields just beyond the bustle of the city, a liminal zone where nightingales were captured for their melodic gifts. Birdcatchers, those shadowy figures cloaked in earth smocks, stalked along hedgerows at dusk, nets in hand, listening for the first tender trills that marked a nightingale's dawn chorus. It was a mainstream fact that by the 1880s, Britain imported upwards of 10,000 nightingales annually, sourced from both local woodlands and exotic corners of Europe. Following a low-roaring river, you trail a line of coarse burlap sacks, hung from wooden stakes. Each holds a precious capture. The gentle sway and faint rustle of feathers hint at the treasures stashed inside. You notice the careful labeling: R. Stanton, the 12th of May, Epping Forest, or H. Muller, the 3rd of June, Bavarian Heath, marking trackers' pride and provenance. Birdcatchers often maintained journals detailing weight, wingspan, and even the bird's first recorded song. Historians still argue whether such rigorous records prioritized welfare or commodified wildlife. Or Victorian parlors, the harbour, that day thrummed with activity. Wooden crates stamped with exotic port marks, Livorno, Zadar, Marseille lined the docks, awaiting lighterage to apothecaries and pet emporia across London. You weave between dock workers hauling sacks into open-mouthed warehouses, inhaling the acrid temps of salt water and the sweet undertones of seed mixes slipped into crates. A quirky tidbit whispers through your thoughts. Some dealers secretly swapped inferior songsters, mockingbirds, or thrushes in plush cages, banking on customers' inability to distinguish subtle tonal differences in dimly lit drawing rooms. Inside, a drafty warehouse, you find a row of brass cages perched on long wooden shelves, each labeled in graceful copperplate script: Nightingale, Pure Song, £1.10s, family-run pet shops, exotic animal vendors that advertised alongside. Tropical fish and canaries procured their stock through these docks. You picture a young shopkeeper, apron dusted with seed husks, humming as he arranges cages like wares in a jewelry display. 3 light jokes flit by, envisioning a hammy auctioneer selling nightingales as the latest bedtime celebrity acts, imagining a sparrow strutting in mock protest outside the warehouse, and picturing a cat lurking in the rafters, eyeing each brass bar with hungry admiration. That wasn't all clandestine or slightly comical. There were regulations, sort of. The Wild Birds Protection Act of 1880 prohibited the export of certain species, though nightingales remained unprotected due to their perceived abundance. Local birdcatchers exploited loopholes, registering their hauls as songbird consignment to skirt legal scrutiny. You catch a flash of a leather-bound ledger where a broker has scrawled, "Subject to veterinary inspection," a line that historians still argue was more lip service than genuine oversight. that as you wind down a creaking staircase to the ground floor of a bustling emporium, you glimpse Victorian families peering into gilded cages, ladies fidget in their corsets, drawing back silk gowns to avoid brushing the cages, fearful of startling the birds and spoiling their sleep cures. Gentlemen in frock coats stroke waxed mustaches as they negotiate prices, debate the merits of continental accents in song, and inquire whether a bird's darkness of plumage correlates to its melodic depth. It's a quirky snippet of consumer culture, early emphasis on accent and style in birdsong, much like today's audiophiles hunting rare vinyl pressings. Nearby, a pungent stall advertises Nightingale song enhancers, secret spice blends, whispered to coax fuller arias from tired larks. You wrinkle your nose at saffron-dusted seed mixes and coriander-infused water spritzes offered as vocal stimulants. A side note survives in a collector's memo: sprinkled saffron at dawn. Birds sang for 4 straight hours, unacceptably peppy for 11's bedtime. Historians still argue whether these concoctions genuinely amplified song or simply backfired, leaving birds overstimulated and humans weary. It's here you catch your reflection in a tarnished mirror. Your gaze drifted toward a cage sporting a tiny brass plaque, imported from Transylvania. You pause, imagining moonlit Carpathian forests, where local trappers might have captured the region's richest toned nightingales. The interplay of Gothic landscapes and gentle lullabies melts the tension. You almost expect a soft echo of a wolf's howl to underlie the bird's melody, yet in dim shop corners, the air thrums with life-fluttering wings, whispered negotiations, and the ceaseless hope of a restful night's sleep. You follow a shadowy corridor behind the shop, where an apothecary's assistant tends to cages. In low lamplight, here, birds receive daily baths in shallow copper basins, scented with rose petals, an ostentatious routine designed to keep plumage pristine for nightly performances. You feel indulgence morph into ritual, feeding, watering, misting, and inspecting each bird's throat for parasites. It's a callback to Emily Fairchild's ventilated designs in Section 6, but now the setting is mass-scale commerce rather than bespoke craftsmanship. 3 light jokes surface, picturing a nightingale complaining to another, "I preferred Emily's cage." This one smells of fishmonger, imagining the assistant singing lullabies to the birds, and seeing a bored cat disguised as a dog slipping in to spy on the melodious tenants outside. The city's gas lamps begin to flicker on, scattering pools of pale yellow light across slick streets. As you step back into the evening air, you lug a velvet-lined cage containing your own new nocturnal companion. The nightingale's faint chirp pricks your senses, promising melodic comfort once you return to your snug lamplit bedroom. A sense that behind every soft trill lay a tangled web of commerce, curiosity, and ethical debate. Historians still argue whether the heart's yearning for restful sleep justified the commodification of wild song. You tuck the cage carefully inside a covered carriage, the owner murmuring, "Handle with care, madam." Its voice is fragile, but oh so powerful. The horses clip-clop toward home as you nestle back, anticipation coiling in your chest. Soon, you'll lift the brass bars and let the nightingale's song weave around your quilt, a delicate compromise of human longing and avian lyric. As the carriage rattles on, the promise of peaceful slumber, delivered by feather and song, fills you with a gentle, hopeful hush. You ease back into the hush of your lamplit parlor, the velvet quilt pooling around your ankles as you turn your attention to the centerpiece of every nightingale therapy session, the ornate brass birdcage. By the late 1870s, such cages had evolved, from simple wire constructions into intricate acoustic vessels designed specifically to carry and amplify every liquid trill. It's a mainstream fact that in 1879, patent records show at least 5 distinct designs for avian sound diffusion cages, each aiming to optimize bath of melody and sleeping chambers. Your gaze traces the looping brass filigree spiraling upward, like miniature wrought-iron balconies wrapping around a fairy tale turret. Some Victorians insisted that concentric rings of brass acted like sound waves spreading across a ponceau. The designer, one Henry Austin, claimed in his 1881 patent, "The curvature of the bar shall direct each warble toward the listener's ear." Historians still argue whether these acoustic theories held scientific water or were marketing flourishes for wealthy clients thirsty for novelty. A quirky tidbit reveals that one cage style resembled a Gothic cathedral, pointed arches of wire, slender spires at each corner, and tiny stained glass panels fused between bars. Owners called them song chapels, suspending them mid-room so the birds' arias seemed to echo like choral hymns. You imagine flickering candlelight filtering through those panels, casting colored shadows across damask walls, rather like an impromptu midnight concert in Notre Dame. As you cradle the cage's curved handle, you feel the cool brass warming against your palm. Inside, the nightingale perches upon a slender driftwood branch, chosen for its tonal harmony, since wood density was thought to affect resonance. Some aficionados went so far as to supply each bird with polished ebony perches, imported from Ceylon, convinced that exotic hardwood enriched timbre. You stifle a grin, picturing a pampered songbird walking on red-carpeted tiny planks, Your mind drifts back to the steam-inflated sleep tent of Section 5, where moist warmth enveloped the body, and to the ventilated design of Emily Fairchild in Section 6 here. The birdcage innovation is purely acoustic artistry. Steel vents spiral down from the top like organ pipes, funneling each chirp through brass flutes that protrude into the sleeper space. You lean in, imagining each flute as a tiny trumpet calling the night to rest. In one corner, you note a small brass plaque, designed by Lady Havisham in 1883. Lady Havisham was known for her obsession with both home decor and birdsong. She purportedly tested dozens of bar thicknesses ranging from fine filaments to robust rods until she settled on the Goldilocks gauge, thick enough to maintain structure but thin enough to vibrate sympathetically with the bird's wing beat. Historians still argue whether structural resonance truly influenced song quality or if the whole exercise was simply fashionable folly. Your reflection shimmers in the polished surface as you adjust tiny leveling feet, ensuring the cage sits perfectly horizontal, supposedly crucial to prevent the bird from sliding off its perch and interrupting the lullaby. You recall the log of an early adopter who noted, "My nightingale ceased warbling sideways when the cage tilted ever so slightly." To port, it's a reminder that even the slightest wobble could spark panic in a delicate creature and rob you of sleep. 3 light jokes flutter through your mind, picturing a footman tiptoeing in to retighten loose screws at midnight, imagining a nightingale demanding a tiny soldering kit to improve its own cage, and conjuring a snooty guest peering into the cage to critique the ear canal alignment of the vents. Each jest nestles against your ribcage, softening any tension left from tales of birdcatchers and bustling docks. You notice the lacquered hardwood base beneath the brass dome, inlaid with a mother-of-pearl compass rose. Legend says this was used to orient cages eastward at dawn, so the first golden rays would dap the bars, coaxing the bird to greet the new day with a light trill. Though most Victorians considered it purely ornamental, yet you can't help but admire the craftsmanship. Each petal of the inlay is a study in iridescence, reflecting flickers of candlelight like a miniature sunrise. A modern aside drifts in. Think of this cage as the Victorian equivalent of a Bose surround sound speaker, but living and breathing. You suppress a smile, picturing audiophiles checking impedance graphs on oscilloscope, then replacing them with trained songbirds. The thought bridges your century-spanning understanding of how humans crave curated soundscapes from vinyl records. 2 live birds. In hushed tones, you discuss with yourself the open debate swirling among scholars. Did these ornate cages genuinely improve sleep quality through acoustic science, or were they merely status symbols flaunted by those with both leisure time and disposable income? Historians still argue whether the acoustic advantages outweighed the cruelty of caging a wild creature for human comfort. You lean in for one more moment, pressing your ear close to a fluted vent-hand. Though your modern ears hear only silence, you imagine the bird's vibrant aria echoing through each brass tube, enveloping you in sonic satin. The weight of the polished dome above you feels protective, like a guardian arch, while the mother-of-pearl compass whispers of voyages to distant lands in pursuit of nocturnal solace. As you settle back into your mattress, the cage perched on its stand beside your pillow, you feel those century-old ambitions for restful sleep align with your own. It's as if the brass cage is a conduit between past and present, a symbol of our enduring hope that beauty, science, and nature can conspire to cradle us into calm. Candlelight ripples off the bars, and you exhale slowly, anticipating the soft symphony to come. In that gentle anticipation, you sense the legacy of these birdcage innovations, a testament to Victorian ingenuity, whimsy, and the endless human quest for the perfect night's rest. And now, cocooned in dreams brink, you tip your head toward that silent brass cathedral, awaiting the note that will turn hush into song. You wake to the soft promise of dawn light filtering through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished wooden floor. Your thoughts drift to the curious art of taming and training nightingales, a genteel, yet surprisingly intricate process that Victorians pursued with near-scientific zeal. Initially, these songbirds arrived in households wide-eyed and skittish, and transforming their wild warbles into reliable lullabies demanded patience, routine, and a few peculiar methods that might make your modern ears twitch. Mainstream bird trainers recommended beginning when the nightingale was still a fledgling, around 4 to 6 weeks old, when its mimicry skills were most pliable. Apprentices would gently cradle the tiny bird against their chest, speaking to it in hushed tones, reciting well-modulated passages of poetry or lullabies. Over weeks, the bird learned not only to sing but to synchronize its notes with human cadence, essentially blending natural melody with learned rhythm. Historians still argue whether this early socialization genuinely improved song quality, or whether it merely created birds congenial enough for domestic environs, sacrificing complexity for compliance. You imagine a gentlewoman seated at her window each morning, singing softly to her neonatal nightingale perched upon a velvet-lined music stand. With each session, she subtly varied her pitch and timing, coaxing the bird into echoing her tonal patterns. A quirky tidbit survives in a memoir of one such trainer. She claimed to have taught her nightingale to trill its staircase-like melody precisely at the third bar, mirroring Chopin's nocturnes. Whether this anecdote was genuine or the result of affectionate embellishment remains part of that ongoing scholarly debate. As the fledgling matured, trainers introduced song scripts, slender strips of parchment inscribed with musical notation and poetic lyrics. They pinned these over the cage door, rotating scripts nightly so the bird's repertoire remained fresh. A modern aside nudges you to compare this to curated Spotify playlists for sleep. You swap digital tracks for hand-scribed melodies etched in ink. 3 light jokes fluttered by, picturing a nightingale scrolling through parchment scripts like celebrity gossip, imagining a butler accidentally feeding the bird bread instead of song scripts, and envisioning a bird critique society meeting where members sniff disdainfully at a nightingale's outdated tune. Training routines adhered to strict schedules. Dawn sessions at 4:30 a.m. before social calls began. Mid-morning recitals at 10, and twilight performances just when the house lights dimmed. This regimen mirrored Victorian sleep schedules, reinforcing the link between birdsong and human circadian rhythms. Trainers observed that birds responding best to consistent timetables exhibited calmer daytime behavior, an early nod to the benefits of sleep hygiene. Historians still argue whether these timetables yielded genuine therapeutic impact or whether the ritual itself provided reassurance and structure to anxious sleepers. The process wasn't without its oddities. Trainers used miniature tuning forks, polished steel rods struck against ivory blocks to set standard pitch. Birds that failed to match the fork's frequency were retaught with stronger stimuli, faint raps on the cage frame or soft blowing through a narrow tube. A fringe practitioner even suggested whispering through a seashell pressed against the cage, believing the shell's resonance would aid auditory learning. You wrinkle your nose at the image of a trainer cupping a seashell as though conversing with the ocean, yet you admire the creative spirit that sought any advantage in perfecting avian lullaby. Moreover, Victorian households sometimes enlisted children as song monitors. Well-behaved young ladies and lads recorded nightly bird performances in ledger books, noting variations in tempo, key, and emotive flourish. These informal records formed early proto-data sets, albeit subjective ones, that aficionados cross-referenced when buying or selling trained nightingales. Historians still argue whether such anecdotal logs contributed meaningfully to ornithological knowledge or simply fed social competition. Among enthusiasts eager to boast the most virtuosic pet, feeding routines dovetailed with training. Songbirds, accustomed to a balanced diet of insects, berries, and seeds, sang more robustly. You imagine a small brass dish filled with mealworms presented at dawn. As a trainer murmured, "Sing well, little one, and your breakfast is secure." A quirky snippet emerges from a trader's catalog. Some suppliers touted song strength. Booster's secret seed blends spiked with saffron and crushed snail shells, though skeptics speculated these additives did more to alter bird coloration than melody. The environment mattered, too, to prevent distraction. Cages were positioned in quiet rooms away from household bustle. Soft fabric backdrops dampened echoes, and caretakers occasionally installed miniature velvet drapes inside the cage, framing the perch like a stage curtain. It's a callback to Section 8's elaborate birdcage designs, but here the focus shifts from acoustic amplification to visual concentration. Trainers believed that a focused bird, with minimal stimuli, would pour its attention into perfecting its song. Over weeks, you sense the bird's confidence blossoming. What began as hesitant chirps transforms into a clear, heart-stirring aria that punctuates the house's nightly hush. You recline on your bolster, listening to the crescendo, the day's final performance, meant to lull you into sleep. 3 light jokes mingle with the melody, picturing a nanny tipping her hat politely to the bird before bedtime, imagining a rival trainer critiquing the aria as to florid, and envisioning the nightingale responding with a sassy trill. That settles the matter. Yet, behind the scenes, ethical questions simmered. Critics argued that shaping a wild songbird's natural repertoire into human-defined patterns was cruel, robbing the bird of instinctual expression. A fringe pamphlet titled "Voices Silenced" lamented that birds trained for domestic recitals lost the spontaneity that defined true nightingale song. Historians still argue whether these shaping methods constituted animal cruelty or were acceptable forms of early behavioral enrichment. As the final notes fade, you feel a warm calm envelop you, a testament both to the bird's innate beauty and the patient artifice that refined it. Your eyelids brush shut, your breath matching the tempo of that last trill. And in the space where sound recedes into silence, you find the gentle threshold of sleep. You awaken to the soft patter of silk slippers on polished floorboards, and realize it's not your bedside bell but the discreet footsteps of the household's appointed bird attendant, often a butler or specially trained footman coming to tend your avian sleep therapist. In the grandest Victorian homes, employing a dedicated nightingale keeper was as commonplace as hiring a valet or a parlourmaid. By the late 1880s, Census records indicate that nearly 1 in 20 British aristocratic households listed bird attendant among their domestic staff, a mainstream fact that highlights just how fashionable live lullabies had become. You slide on a plush robe and follow the gentle echo down a corridor lined with family portraits, the hush punctuated by the faint screech of a nightingale eager for its evening meal. The attendant kneels beside the gilded cage, his white-gloved hands moving with practiced precision. He unlocks the brass door, offering a shallow porcelain dish of mealworms warmed to room temperature. According to surviving employment manuals, this precise feeding ritual was timed to the bird's natural circadian rhythms. Too early, and the melody might be sharp and restless. Too late, and the nightingale might nod off mid-song. Historians still argue whether such strict feeding schedules improved sleep outcomes or simply showcased aristocratic obsession with control. As he refills the water droplet feeder, a slender glass tube with a tiny silver valve, you notice a quirky tidbit. Some attendants added a single crushed peppermint leaf to fresh water, believing the scent calmed the bird's nerves and enriched its nocturnal warble. You wrinkle your nose at the idea of peppermint-scented bathwater, but the butler swears by it, insisting that without the mint, the nightingale's trill occasionally sounded flat. It's a small detail, yet it speaks volumes about the lengths these households went to orchestrate perfect acoustic comfort. You watch the attendant meticulously straighten the moss lining at the cage's base and adjust the driftwood perch to the bird's preferred angle, just a few degrees off horizontal, as indicated by a penciled note on a brass plate reading perch tilt 3 port. In some grand estates, the attendant maintained a ledger book recording each bird's temperament, appetite, and song clarity, early behavioral logs that readers likened to the diaries of schoolmistresses, monitoring allowances and table manners. 3 light jokes flutter through your mind, picturing a rival estate's butler smirking and declaring his nightingale outperformed yours, imagining a pied à terre birdcatcher secretly coaching attendants on proper pep talk, and visualizing the bird attending its own staff appraisal, chirping critiques on its keeper's iron polish. Once the feeding is complete, the attendant leans in to inspect the bird's throat, a nod but true practice detailed in a handful of veterinary tracts. Uses a tiny brass throat mirror, the same style used by ENT specialists, to catch any signs of respiratory irritation. If a hoarseness is detected, he whispers a home remedy passed down through generations, a drop of glycerin mixed with elderflower extract applied to the bird's beak, rumored to soothe cracked vocal cords. Historians still argue whether these veterinary measures genuinely protected the bird's health or merely gave well-meaning staff a sense of medical agency. With a final gentle pat to the cage's exterior, the attendant closes the door and straightens, silent, dignified, a living the link between you and the feathered dreamweaver. He departs with the same light-footed grace, leaving you alone with a promise of song. You close your eyes briefly, absorbing the ritual's rhythm, feeding, inspection, straightening, retreat, a choreography as precise as any ballet. It's as intimate as a whispered goodnight, and in its steadiness you find a comfort that even the softest mechanical music box could not match. You settle back under your quilt and recall Emily Fairchild's ventilated cage section 6 and Lady Havisham's song chapel design section 8. Here, in the hush of your personal suite, the human hand and the avian voice merge in delicate cooperation. A modern aside think piece bubbles up. Imagine ordering this level of bespoke service from an apt tonight's bird attendant, Alfred, 7 p.m. to 7:15 p.m. The thought is absurd enough to coax a sleepy smile. Now comes the moment you've awaited. The hush deepens, the caged nightingale turns its head, and with the first wistful note, the lullaby begins. It's not the blustery trill of a wild dawn chorus, but a measured, almost conspiratorial melody, each phrase pausing just long enough to let your breath catch up. Soft warbles cascade like gentle rain, punctuated by hushed chirps that feel like affectionate nudges to your ears. The bird attendant's careful preparations pay off. Every note seems to ripple through the quilted walls, wrapping the room in a velvety cocoon of sound. But note, even in this domestic idyll, controversy simmered. Early animal rights proponents decried the practice as exploitation, insisting that forcing nocturnal song from a creature bred for wild forests amounted to cruelty. A fringe pamphlet titled Songbirds in Servitude criticized the attendant's role as a kind of cage-side jailer. Historians still argue whether the comfort these birds provided offset the ethical costs of confining them for human luxury. Despite the undercurrent of debate, you find the lullaby soothing. The nightingale's melodic arc rises and falls in gentle waves, syncing with your heartbeat as though it had learned your pulse in those training sessions from Section 9. You inhale the faint peppermint lingering on the wire bars and let your thoughts dissolve into the bird's final dominion. 3 light jokes drift across your mind, picturing a bored cat taking notes on song quality, imagining the attendant secretly humming along off-key, and envisioning a rival butler commissioning a robot nightingale to undercut the human element. As the last trill fades into near silence, you drift in the liminal space where melody becomes memory. The brass cage glimmers one final time in the candlelight, empty of motion but alive with resonance. You feel the attendant's ritual echo in your chest, the careful tending, the whispered remedies, the hush of meticulous care. In that echo lies a promise that sleep, once so elusive, can be coaxed from the world's smallest voices, nurtured by unseen hands. Your eyelids flutter closed. Your breaths become long and even, and in the hush left behind by the bird's lullaby and the attendant's footsteps, you slip past consciousness. Here, amidst layers of quilt and brass, of feather and ritual, you discover the timeless truth woven through Victorian bedrooms, that rest like song is often crafted by gentle stewardship, broken only when we forget to listen. You wake to the faint rustle of silk curtains drifting in a gentle draught, and you find yourself back in Lady Carlisle's refined drawing-room, a hush-hushed salon where enlightened Victorians debated the true source of the Nightingales' soothing power. Candlelight shimmers off polished mahogany, and plush armchairs form a cozy semicircle around a marble-topped table laden with porcelain teacups and Hafian petit fours. The centerpiece is, of course, the Nightingale's cage, its brass filigree gleaming like an altar for avian worship. Tonight's topic was the bird's lullaby, a simple natural melody, or did it channel ethereal forces beyond human understanding? Mainstream naturalists argued that the Nightingale's song derived purely from instinct and training routines, a product of Syrinx anatomy, and learned patterns honed by seasoned trainers refer back to the meticulous training logs of Section 9. Meanwhile, a fringe faction buoyed by the era's spiritualist craze insisted that these birds served as mediums, bridging the material world to realms unseen. You lean forward on your velvet cushion, curious to witness this genteel clash of science and spirit. The host, Reverend Marlowe, begins with measured calm. He cites recent ornithological studies published in the Journal of Zoology in 1884, documenting the complex muscle control within a nightingale's syrinx that enables precise pitch modulation. It is, undeniably, he intones, a marvel of avian physiology, and he gestures toward the cage. Historians still argue whether these anatomical explanations fully satisfy the romantic hunger for mystery. You nod, imagining the flurry of feathers and airflow within that tiny organ, all distilled into lilting stanzas that drift through the air. Across the circle, Madame Lucille de Beaumont, a stocky figure in mourning black, taps her fan thoughtfully. She recounts séance reports from her cousin's estate in Kent, where a nightingale perched beside a crystal bowl seemed to coo in response to spirit rappings. According to her, each distinct trill corresponded to a message from departed love. Once it's a quirky tidbit that survives in yellowing letters, though skeptics note that enthusiastic mourners might have projected meaning onto any random warble. Historians still argue whether these anecdotal séances bore any resemblance to genuine mediumship or were mere byproducts of collective longing. You sip jasmine tea and feel the gentle prickle of anticipation as guests share their personal experiences. A lieutenant from India recalls hearing a captive nightingale mimic the cadence of local Hindu prayers. It was as if the bird absorbed the rhythmic chant of temple services at dawn. Whether this reflects true mimicry or selective memory remains hotly debated. Yet the report fueled speculation that nightingales possessed an otherworldly capacity to internalize not just notes but the emotional resonance behind them. The Reverend raises an eyebrow at these spiritual claims. He slides a copy of Darwin's On the Origin of Species across the table, highlighting passages on behavioral adaptation. We must be cautious, he warns, not to romanticize avian ability into mystical fantasy. A low murmur of agreement ripples through the scientifically minded faction, those who praised Lady Havisham's cage designs in Section 8 for their acoustic merit rather than their gothic allure. You feel the salon's temperature rise with polite tension, aware that even here, in a parlor of genteel discourse, passions ignite over the origin of a simple song. Madame de Beaumont, unflappable, fans herself and counters with references to Emanuel Swedenborg's treatises on spirit communication, arguing that birds, unburdened by human artifice, could serve as purer vessels for celestial voices. She produces a slip of parchment inscribed with strange notations, 3 specific trills mapped to deceased relatives' initials. You peep at the cryptic symbols and shiver at the possibility. Could each languorous warble truly carry encoded messages? It seems improbable, yet the allure of hidden meaning tugs at your imagination like a soft undercurrent. A younger guest, a chemist with suit-strict fingers, joins the fray. He proposes a middle ground. Perhaps chemical cues influence bird behavior, imbuing songs with subtle pheromonal undercurrents perceptible to human senses. He cites early pheromone research suggesting that scent and sound converge in mysterious ways. It's a fringe theory, but one rooted in burgeoning chemical science. Historians still argue whether any Victorian accounts demonstrated a credible link between scent and avian vocalization, or whether such claims were fanciful extrapolations of nascent science. You glance at the nightingale, perched serenely on its driftwood branch, oblivious to the intellectual volley, its head cocked to one side. It lets out a gentle trill that sends ripples through everyone's pulse. Some guests murmur in reverence, others jot notes feverishly. You feel a gentle tug in your chest, a mix of awe and skepticism, much like those earlier debates over laudanum's efficacy in Section 5 versus herbal sachets allure in Section 1. A scholar of acoustics pipes up, demonstrating how a choir of trained nightingales, each housed in adjoining sound diffusion cages, to produce harmonic overtones reminiscent of human choral arrangements. He arranges a small ensemble and cues them to sing in unison. The group hears a shimmering cascade of notes, a natural overture both delicate and profound. Yet he concedes, while the phenomenon is remarkable, we must remember the birds' voices remain organic. No evidence suggests spirit intrusion. Madame de Beaumont shrugs, leaning back in her chair. Call it urn songs or spirit songs, she murmurs. But does it matter? If the cries of unseen worlds soothe our hearts, perhaps that is miracle enough. A hush falls as you consider her words. The salon's debates wind to a close as the Reverend summons a final vote. Natural phenomenon or mystical medium. The tally is nearly even. A testament to Victorian's dual thirst for scientific rigor and spiritual mystery. 3 light jokes drift in your mind as the salon disperses. Picturing an outraged spirit tapping its toes at being reduced to a bird's trill, imagining a nightingale rolling its eyes at human dramatics, and conjuring the chemist earnestly sniffing the air for pheromones like a Victorian bloodhound. Each joke eases the lingering tension, reminding you of the story's lightly absurd charm. As you step out onto the moonlit terrace, the nightingale's melody drifts after you, a final refrain that seems to echo both earthly biology and ethereal longing. You inhale the cool air, the scent of night-blooming jasmine mingling with a faint peppermint trace from the bird's last bath. Whether the song is natural grace or spirit-laced cipher, it has woven itself into your mind, stitching a tapestry of melody, mystery, and memory. You head back inside, candle flicker guiding your steps, your heart brimming with the salon's lingering question, does the veil between worlds truly whisper in birdsong? You climb into bed, awaiting the return of that mediated lullaby, to surrender to sleep in the gentle embrace of unresolved wonder. You wake to the soft warmth of a velvet blanket settling around your shoulders, its plush weight easing tension from your limbs as the nightingale's gentle chirps weave through the stillness. In these sensory rituals, every element to the drape of fabric, the whisper of birdsong, the hushed notes of room ambience works in concert to cradle you toward sleep. You stretch beneath the layered textiles, feeling the subtle pressure of woolen throws and silk brocade cushions that Victorian households prized for both comfort and status. It's a mainstream fact that by the late 1880s, many sleep theorists endorsed multisensory immersion, combining tactile, olfactory, and auditory stimuli to lull patients into repose. A celebrated physician, Dr. Marion Ellsworth, wrote in 1889 that the synergy of velvet textures and ordered sounds could synchronize neural rhythms, much like modern studies on weighted blankets and binaural beats. You inhale the faint scent of rose-scented water sprinkled on the blankets. Nod to the sachets of lavender and hops you first tucked under your pillow in Section 1. Beyond roses, sensory curators experimented with other fragrances: crushed rosemary in porcelain dishes, cinnamon sticks woven into tassels, and rare orange blossom oil diffused by low-light burners. You notice a small silver censer at the foot of your bed, its wisp of smoke curling through the air, carrying a subtle sweetness that teases your senses. A quirky tidbit survives in a snippet of Lady Hartwell's diary. She once requested dragon's blood resin to be burned at her bedside, believing its mysterious fragrance would ward off nightmares. Historians still argue whether such exotic scents provided genuine physiological benefit or merely indulged aristocratic opulence. Your fingertips brush the velvet canopy overhead, where tiny bells hang at each corner, meant to tinkle softly if the blankets shift to abrupt attendance to any mid-sleep disturbances. It's a callback to the delicate bell pull systems of earlier salons Section 3, and the precise yet whimsical contraptions like soundscape boxes. A light joke flits across your mind, picturing a startled guest waking at midnight to jingling bells, announcing "I shall not sleep," as if summoning a grand audience to witness their insomnia below your hand. The quilt's layers rustle in measured harmony with the bird's chirps. Combined, they form a gentle patter of sound, textile whispers meeting avian notes. You tap the brook-patterned rail of your feather-stuffed mattress, recalling the soundbox's pastoral recordings. Unlike those mechanical loops, these nocturnal warbles carry the richness of a living throat, unpredictable yet comforting in their authenticity. In one corner, a small wooden stand holds a porcelain bowl of warm milk infused with vanilla and a dash of brandy, a silent nod to the tinctures and cordials you explored in Section 5. You lift the cup, its heat radiating through thin fingers, and feel the tendrils of drowsiness coil tighter around your mind. 3 light jokes drift in your thoughts, imagining someone scolding the milk. "Not too soothing, darling, I haven't had my birdsong encore yet." Picturing a cat rifling through the orange blossom oil looking for hidden treats, and envisioning a jealous nightingale tweeting criticisms about the cloying sweetness of human beverages. Attendants and household staff were trained in these multi-sensory rituals. Feather dusters replaced coarse brooms before bedtime, ensuring every surface was free of intrusive textures. Silk slippers clicked softly over velvet rugs to maintain hush. Even fireplaces were banked with green embers rather than roaring flames, producing gentle, sibilant warmth instead of crackling pops. You sense the deliberate choreography, each action measured to minimize sudden stimuli. Once the sensory stage is set, the Nightingale's cage is positioned on a low pedestal draped in charcoal velvet, its bars gleaming in the muted glow of a single sconced lamp. You tilt your head, aligning your ear with one of the fluted brass vents described in Section 8. The bird greets you with a velvety trill that seems to stroke the velvet walls of your mind, like a silken brush painting strokes of calm across. Your consciousness thought the layering of fabrics also served a functional purpose. Woolen blankets trapped the bird's warmth, creating a microclimate that encouraged vocal performance. Some practitioners even sewed tiny pockets of steamed lavender buds into the blanket seams, an echo of the steam tent's chamomile infusion in Section 5, now brought to bear on textiles themselves. Historians still argue whether these embedded aromatics imparted enough vapor to impact sleep quality, or whether they risked dampening the blankets and fostering mildew in unheated Victorian rooms. You lift a corner of the top blanket to peer at the bird. Its eyes are half closed, and droplets of condensation bead on the inside of the cage dome, suggesting that the ambient warmth and humidity are indeed palpable. The interplay of your body heat, the weighted layers, and the bird's biological comfort seems to converge in a shared cocoon of rest. A quirky thought surfaces. Imagine a nightingale tucking itself into micro-blankets of its own. If only cage designers had thought to add tiny textiles for avian comfort. 2. Across your line of sight, the walls are hung with tapestries depicting pastoral scenes of woodland clearings at dusk, where nightingales sing among birch boughs. It's a callback to Section 1's pastoral wallpaper, but here the imagery feels immersive, priming your mind to expect nature's lullaby. Visual textures dovetail with your tactile and auditory stimuli, wrapping the entire space in a cohesive, sleep-inducing narrative. A soft murmur echoes as your housekeeper listens at a small peephole in the bedroom door, ready to adjust sense or volume should you stir. In larger estates, this role was formalized. The night breeze attendant monitored environmental variables, tweaking window slits for fresh air, adjusting lambent flames, and even refining the nightingale's perch height to optimize sound projection. 3 light jokes pass through your drowsy mind, picturing an attendant brandishing a thermometer like a pharmacist, announcing you're too warm by half a degree, sir. Imagining a bickering duo arguing over the perfect angle for the velvet curtains, and seeing a nightingale rolling its head in mild annoyance at all the human fuss. As the minutes tick by, the gentle symphony of feather and song swells, fabric sighs under your movements, dovetailing with each measured trill that arcs through the air. You feel as though you're suspended in a slow-motion dance, guided by invisible partners, the bird, the blankets, the incense smoke, and the hush of the room's design. Your breathing lengthens in time with the rhythm, and you realize the sensory ritual's true power lies not in any single element, but in their careful orchestration. Here, where velvet meets melody, the boundary between body and environment dissolves. You become part of the tapestry, an integral thread woven through birdsong and embroidered cloth. As you drift toward unconsciousness, you recall histories of restless minds soothed by similar rituals, how a single soft trill could outshine laudanum's chemical lull, if only for a night. You feel gratitude for every gentle quirk, the peppermint water droplet, the muffled jingle of bells, and the bouquet of rose and orange blossoms mingling in the air with the final trill. The tapestry of sound and sensation collapses into a serene silence. You sink deeper into the plush layers cocooned in velvet hush, and surrender to that liminal dream space where history and rest entwine. You drift in the amber glow of your lamplit chamber, the nightingale's final warble fading into a warm hush that feels almost sacred. Yet beneath this serene veneer lies a carousel of scholarly contention, a perpetual tug-of-war between birdsong enthusiasts and the proponents of chemical sedatives. Mainstream medical journals of the 1890s brimmed with comparative studies. One such paper in the British Medical Journal reported that 65% of patients given chloral hydrate fell asleep within an hour, while only 42% aided by nightingale therapy reached sleep in the same time frame. Historians still argue whether such statistics truly captured the quality of slumber or merely quantified minutes of unconsciousness. You picture a wood-paneled lecture hall where bespectacled doctors pore over graphs and case notes. In one corner, Dr. Percival Claiborne brandishes a vial of laudanum, extolling its rapid onset, a mere quarter-hour, he declares, while across the room, Lady Fairchild's granddaughter presents Emily's cage designs as evidence that natural harmonics force a deeper REM cycles. The tension crackles like the faint snap of a distant candle wick, pitting pharmacology against ornithology in a battle for crown and comfort. Your senses reel. The faint metallic tinkle of the birdcage vents echoes in your mind, mingling with an imagined hiss of chemical dispensers measuring chloral drops. You remember the bitter laudanum from Section 5, its opiate warmth sliding down the throat, and compare it to the lived-in novelty of a nightingale's trill, which breathes life into the stillness, yet which truly yields restorative rest. That answer eludes consensus. Historians still argue whether the subjective reports of dream quality, longer vivid dreams, and fewer bucolic intrusions outweighed the objective ease of chemical sedation. Quirky tidbit peers through the debate. Some sleep researchers of the era secretly lobotomized a handful of song recordings onto wax cylinders, believing they could play back a standardized Nightingale lullaby without live birds. The recordings, however, emitted a tinny echo that provoked more startlement than calm. Leading chemists quipped that mechanical nightingales were about as soothing as rattling skeletons. 3 light jokes flit through your drowsy head, envisioning a doctor prescribing a gramophone lullaby and a swift punch of bromide, picturing a nightingale suing for copyright infringement, and imagining a matron declaring that if she wanted tinny music, she'd play her calliope down at the carnival. Back in your bedchamber, you nestle deeper into your quilt, recalling the resourceful butlers of Section 10 tending wards of cages with peppermint-tinted water, their meticulous logs detailing which birds sang best after a teaspoon of brandy or a dash of saffron red like experimental drug trials. Indeed, some apothecaries measured laudanum potency and morphine equivalents as carefully as bird attendants. Timed mealworm feedings. A fringe pharmacist even mixed a lark's tongue tincture, claiming it harmonized with native birdsong to amplify sleep benefits. Though more than a few patients woke convinced they'd sprouted feathers, you sense the hush shift as you imagine side-by-side trials. One patient lulled by a brass cage's acoustics, another slumped by chloral hydrate. One diary notes that chloral patients awoke groggy, disoriented, sometimes plagued by headaches, while Nightingale-treated sleepers reported waking refreshed, albeit occasionally singing in their dreams. It's a compelling juxtaposition. But you wonder which flaw seems more tolerable, chemical hangovers or ultrasonic bird carols echoing in one's psyche. A modern aside drifts into your thoughts. It's akin to today's debates over melatonin versus white noise machines, both aiming for the same endpoint, but each with advocates swearing by their side's purity. You smile, imagining a 19th century influencer preaching all-natural avian ASMR on a penny-farthing bicycle tour, complete with sponsored songbirds in gilded cages. 3 light jokes emerge, picturing a medical student Googling Nightingale therapy ROI, imagining a bromide distributor secretly bribing ornithologists, and picturing a birdcatcher-turned-pharmacist launching Nightingale in a bottle syrup. In hushed tones, you recall that some critics accused chemical sleep aids of fostering mental dependency and moral degradation. Religious pamphlets decried laudanum as a demon's lullaby, while more secular physicians warned of chronic sedation eroding one's will. Meanwhile, proponents of birdsong therapy touted its uplifting ethos, arguing that it encouraged patients to engage with nature, even if caged, fostering mental well-being. Historians still argue whether the unintended side effect of bird therapy heightened empathy for living creatures outweighed the convenience of a quick pill from your bed. You reach for the velvet-trapped cage stand and feel the cold brass beneath your fingertips. You remember Lady Havisham's compass-inlaid bass from Section 8 and Emily Fairchild's ventilated marvels from Section 6. Each design choice claimed acoustic superiority, yet one wonders if the human ear's subjective delight played a larger role than any scientific acoustic enhancement. Your eyelids flutter as you consider the logistical burdens. Live birds required feeding, cleaning, and careful monitoring, labor-intensive processes that fit neatly into aristocratic budgets but strained working-class pockets. Chemical sedatives, on the other hand, were mass-produced, shelf-stable, and easily dosed, far more accessible to those lacking birdcatchers and butlers. Even politicians weighed in. In 1893, a parliamentary committee debated subsidizing sedatives for the poor rather than funding rural bird sanctuaries to service urban insomnia. Historians still argue whether this decision reflected fiscal pragmatism or a willful disregard for humane sleep solutions. Your breathing slows as you feel the weight of history pressing gently on your mind. In one final scholarly flourish, consider how evolving scientific rigor transformed both therapies. Ostensible case studies of birdsong were gradually replaced by placebo-controlled trials, and birdcages gave way to phonograph recordings, itself a middle ground. You imagine early psychiatrists measuring electroencephalograms of sleepers enveloped in bird calls, juxtaposing alpha wave activity against those who took chloral. The results were mixed. Some charts showed deeper waves with live birds, others exhibited more consistent sleep stages with pharmaceuticals. Yet for you, in this liminal space where breath and history entwine, the debate resolves into a softer question: which lullaby feels truest to your heart? Is it the honeyed trill of a living songster perched nearby, or the silent drift induced by a carefully measured dose? Perhaps the answer lies not in research notes but in the tender hush that follows whichever method you choose, be it chemical, calm, or feathered chorus. You close your eyes, letting the memory of birdsong swirl in the hush, and surrender to the unresolved wonder that has guided restless souls for centuries. You awaken to the faint rustle of newspaper pets, a discarded edition of the Times reporting on burgeoning animal welfare sentiments sweeping through London's drawing rooms. Outside, the city hums with carriage wheels and factory whistles. But inside, a different drumbeat has begun. The gentle yet insistent call for kinder treatment of captive songbirds. By 1881, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, RSPCA, had logged thousands of complaints about domestic avian servitude, marking a mainstream fact that public concern over birdcage therapies had grown from a niche whisper to a full portfolio of petitions and polemics. You settle back into your quilted nest where once a brass song chapel stood proudly and listened to the echo of distant debates. Animal welfare advocates argued that confining wild creatures to ornate, metal prisons for human comfort was an ethical transgression. A quirky tidbit: some pamphleteers even wore badges shaped like tiny broken cages, symbolizing solidarity with silent wings. Historians still argue whether this early advocacy truly changed public attitudes or merely drove bird therapies underground, trading gilded cages for discreet sound recordings. In candlelit parlors, you overhear gentlefolk whispering about the avicide, a term coined by reformers to describe the death of a bird's spirit under captivity. Gentlewomen convened tearful salons to read aloud heart-wrenching verses penned by poets like Anna Sewell, author of Black Beauty. Only here she lamented caged nightingales whose throats once soared under open skies. You recall the drawing-room seances of Section Xi, but here the tone shifts from mystical speculation to moral responsibility. A modern aside flickers in your mind. Think of today's viral animal rescue videos stirring global empathy, and you'll sense the same impulse. Victorians, too, were moved by images of plucked feathers and cramped cages. 3 light jokes flutter through the haze, picturing an aristocrat fainting at the sight of a wire perch, imagining a cat at a protest rally holding a placard "Let birds be birds," and visualizing a group of butlers furtively dismantling cages at midnight, whispering "We're liberating the soprano section." At a grand estate on Grosvenor Square, a heated town hall meeting unfolds, complete with velvet drapes and eager reporters. One side defends bird therapies as therapeutic art without nightingales. How would overstressed barons ever find rest? Opponents counter that no aesthetic flourish justifies the suffering of a tiny songbird. Lady Kensington, a prominent patron, brandishes a blueprint of Henry Austen's patented cage, declaring its acoustic merits. Across the room, Dr. Ethelwyn Spencer reads from RSPCA records detailing cases of birds plucking their own feathers in panic, an early symptom of what modern ethologists call stereotypic stress behaviors. Historians still argue whether these documented anxieties were widespread or limited to a few highly sensitive specimens. You hear the distant tinkle of a broken bell, one of those tiny lantern bells from Section 12's Canopy Corners, now symbolically snapped off by activists. Sound reverberates in your mind, a call to reconsider the entire sensory ritual. You imagine the once cozy bedroom vibe, silk steam song now tinged with the knowledge that your comfort might come at another creature's anguish. In hushed tones, reformers proposed bird-free soundscapes, mechanical melody boxes, recording live warbles and replaying them, an idea first mooted in Section 13's phonograph whisperings. Yet early experiments produced warped echoes that some claimed irritated nerves worse than living song. A quirky note in a reform pamphlet wryly observed, "A mechanical nightingale is but a tin can mocking nature's hymn." Even so, such devices gained traction among households, unwilling to abandon their sleep rituals but eager to align with humane principles. You picture yourself at an apothecary's counter, selecting a birdsong cylinder instead of a live singer, the shopkeeper tucking the fragile wax cylinder into a velvet-lined box. 3 light jokes drift by, imagining a cylinder slipping and shattering into shards of waxbird feathers, picturing a nightingale offended by its tinny twin, and envisioning a guest complaining, "This playback lacks the aroma of peppermint water." Meanwhile, princesses and duchesses penned open letters to the Illustrated London News, urging fellow gentlewomen to sponsor bird sanctuaries rather than private collections. These sanctuaries, quiet woodlots on the outskirts of town, offered refuge for displaced songbirds, a precursor to modern wildlife preserves. Yet the cost of transporting a lady to Epping Forest to hear free nightingale song rivaled the price of a single brass cage. Exposing a socio-economic divide, humane options were often luxuries in themselves. Historians still argue whether these early preserves democratized access to nature or remained exclusive havens for the wealthy. Your breath slows as you imagine twilight strolls in these sanctuaries, gravel paths under beech canopies, the real warbles weaving through fresh air rather than through metal filigree. The sensory tapestry of Section 12 velvet incense song now seems over-engineered, even indulgent. You sense a shift from curated comfort to authentic communion, a movement that resonates with modern ecotherapy trends. Back in your own bedroom, you gaze at the empty stand where the cage once perched. You recall the bird attendant's meticulous rituals from Section 10 and Emily Fairchild's ventilated marvels from Section 6. Now, instead of preparing mealworms and peppermint water, perhaps the attendant would ready a path through budding orchards for sunrise strolls. A light joke surfaces, picturing the butler swapping his bird-keeping manual for a map of Epping Forest, grumbling, "I trained for cages, not countryside tours." As the reform fervor cooled into long-term policy, Parliament amended the Wild Birds Protection Act in 1894, extending protections to nightingales and several other species. It was a landmark victory, mainstream fact marking the first legal acknowledgement that human comfort must sometimes yield to animal welfare. Yet enforcement lagged, and clandestine birdcatchers adapted by smuggling song recording devices alongside their avian cargo, weaving new threads in the tapestry of sleep therapies. You lean back, feeling the gentle hush of change settle around you. The moral ambivalence of Section 13's scholarly disputes now crystallizes comfort gained at another's expense can haunt the sweetest lullaby. But in this dawning awareness, you find a deeper kind of solace, a reminder that rest and compassion need not be mutually exclusive. 3. Final light. Jokes drift through your mind, picturing a Nightingale Council convening to draft their own labor union demands, imagining an 1890s wellness magazine featuring headlines Rowdy Robin Rebellion, and visualizing a pair of sparrows picketing outside a grand manor, chirping, "Free our friends." With a soft smile, you slip under your blankets and let the unburdened hush bloom in your chest. As sleep's gentle veil descends, you carry with you the lesson that true rest comes not from isolation or dominion, but from harmony both with your own needs and with the world's smallest voices. You awake to the soft patter of dawn's first light spilling through lace curtains, and your thoughts drift to the unique relationship Victorian women forged with their bedside nightingales. In an era when female health was often reduced to nebulous female ailments like hysteria and nervous exhaustion, women found solace in the bird's gentle song, a mainstream fact supported by medical writings of the late 19th century, which recommended music therapy for women suffering from what doctors called neurasthenia. You settle deeper under your quilt and imagine a genteel drawing room where ladies reclining on chaise longues absorbed each warble as a prescribed tonic, far preferable to the condescending arm-twisting of corseted treatment rooms. It's here you discover a quirky tidbit. Some Victorian diarists claimed that the nightingale's midday trill could regulate menstrual cycles. One Miss Henrietta Lauderdale recorded in her journal how, during particularly trying months, she listened to her pet's song at precisely 2 p.m. each day, believing it soothed cramps and restored hormonal balance. Historians still argue whether such anecdotal correlations held any physiological merit, or whether they merely reinforced the ritual's comforting rhythm. You imagine the clock ticking toward afternoon, a lady poised with teacup in hand, awaiting that familiar cascade of notes like a pharmacopoeia of melody. In private women's salons, midwives and female physicians, an emerging profession in places like London and Edinburgh, endorsed nightingale therapy for postpartum melancholia. You picture a softly lit nursery where a new mother, pale and fragile after childbirth, lies swathed in muslin, her infant cradled at her side. Above her, the brass cage swings gently, its acoustic vents directing the bird's lullaby toward her ear. A contemporary medical treatise by Dr. Margaret Todd, writing under the pseudonym Graham Travers, praised such non-invasive remedies, arguing that live music promoted emotional well-being far more kindly than confinement or sedative potions. Yet skeptics warned these methods might distract from underlying physical recovery. Historians still argue whether music therapy delayed proper medical intervention or simply offered a humane complement to conventional care. You feel the silk sheets shift beneath you as you recall fashionable accessories. Some women adopted miniature pocket cages on velvet ribbons worn around the neck, keeping the nightingale song ever present. It's a whimsical image. Imagine a lady promenading through Kensington Gardens, her bird peeking from beneath lace collars, serenading her step by step. The chatter of passers-by praising her novel living locket must have been both flattering and awkward. 3 light jokes hover in your mind, picturing a gentleman tipping his top hat to the little songstress, imagining a puzzled policeman trying to arrest a fugitive bird on parade, and seeing a curious child asking, "Is that bird your jewelry or you're its home?" Women also employed nightingale song to ease menopausal symptoms, hot flashes, mood swings, and restless nights. A fringe healer named Mrs. Arabella Thorncroft claimed that playing birdsong recordings at twice the natural speed could jolt the body back into floral harmony, though critics noted the accelerated melodies often induced headaches instead of relief. You wrinkle your nose, picturing a spinning lullaby like a musical funhouse ride, and laugh softly at the thought. Yet it illustrates the lengths to which Victorian women, from suffragettes to society matrons, would go in their quest for comfort. Historians still argue whether such experimental therapies advanced the cause of women's autonomy or merely perpetuated fads detached from medical science. Your senses drift to a memory of a private seance where a nightingale's song was woven into spiritualist rituals aimed at calming female spirits thought prone to possession. Female mediums, grappling with a society that distrusted women's psychic authority, coaxed their captive songbirds to sing beneath crystal chandeliers. Participants believed the bird's melody bridged mortal anxieties and spectral realms, granting women agency over both their emotions and purported spirit encounters. It's a heady mix of melody and mysticism. Imagine the hush of corseted breath as the bird's notes weave through rose-scented incense smoke, As you turn in bed, the quilted layers rustle with delicate bells, an echo of earlier sensory rituals, but now you're struck by how restorative this feminine-inflected therapy felt compared to the rigid regimens of male physicians. You recall the medicinal cordials of Section 5 and the steam tents of Section 12, but here the emphasis is on emotional resonance. A modern aside flits through your drowsy mind. Think of Nightingale therapy as the Victorian precursor to today's wellness playlists, curated by women for women, long before Spotify or self-care influencers existed. The interplay of soft feathered comfort and song held deep social significance. It granted Victorian women a measure of control over their own bodies and moods in a culture that often dismissed their pain. An obscure footnote in a suffragette pamphlet lauded the Nightingale as the only doctor who listens, a phrase that lingers like a whispered rebellion. 3 light jokes drift by, picturing a suffragette lobbying Parliament to allocate funds for birdcage stipends, imagining a husband grumbling if she wanted a doctor who sings she should have married a tenor, and seeing a birdcatcher offering discounts to female-only households, yet not all accepted this bird-based remedy. Some male surgeons decried it as frivolous, insisting that true relief required anatomical understanding. Laparotomies dosed anesthetics and measured opiates. They warned that relying on music could leave serious conditions undiagnosed. Women countered that these invasive measures risked worse harm, arguing that song-based therapies were gentle, reversible, and free from chemical side effects. Historians still argue whether this clash reflected genuine medical discourse or simply masked gendered power struggles within Victorian healthcare. You feel your breathing slow, matching the imagined trill of a nightingale's falong note. In the hush of your room, you sense a lineage of women who claimed the bird's chorus as their Elah midwives, soothing newborn anxieties, mothers easing postpartum melancholy, and elders cradling the quiet turbulence of menopause. Each note wove a soft shield against cultural constraints, granting a fleeting sense of solidarity and self-care. Your eyelids grow heavy as you caress the quilt's velvet edge, recalling all the ways women embraced bedside birds to claim rest on their own terms. In that lingering melody, you find a reminder that even in restrictive times, gentle alliances with nature could yield profound comfort. You succumb to the hush, carried away by ancestral song and the simple, enduring power of a woman's choice. You stir beneath your layered quilts as the hush of your chamber shifts toward the world of words, and you recall how Victorian authors wove nightingales into their prose and poetry, turning birdsong into literary lullabies. In 1850, Alfred Lord Tennyson published the Lotus Cetas, referencing the nightingale's melodious voice to evoke dreamy stasis. And by mid-century, Charles Dickens had sprinkled nightingale motifs throughout his novels to represent hope flickering in dank urban alleyways. Historians still argue whether Dickens used these avian allusions to critique industrial London's dehumanizing clamor or simply to add pastoral charm to otherwise gritty narratives. You imagine yourself nestled in a high-backed chair at a walnut, writing desk, quill in hand. As Dickens composes a scene in Great Expectations, the protagonist pauses beneath a moonlit elm, hearing a solitary nightingale singing beyond the smog-shrouded Thames. It's a mainstream fact that Dickens first heard nightingales during walks in Kent's marshlands, inspiring him to contrast rural solace with city cacophony. A quirky tidbit: Dickens invited live songbirds into his study at Gad's Hill Place, curious to see if their warbles might spark fresh turns of phrase, only to have a nightingale repeatedly peck his manuscripts, leaving tiny holes where ink once flowed. You lean back, recalling the velvet canopy and brass song chapel cages of Section 8, and picture that same birdcage perched by Dickens's writing slope, its fluted vents channeling melody to fuel creative reveries. 3 light jokes drift through your mind, picturing Dickens scolding the nightingale for editing his drafts, imagining a quill performing a duet with a warble, and visualizing misread page proofs dotted with bird droppings labeled artists' embellishments. Across the channel, poets like Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Matthew Arnold framed Nightingale's song in verses exploring loss and longing. Barrett Browning's sonnet sequence sonnets from the Portuguese likens her heart to that caged bird, its occasional free note echoing secret joy. Arnold's Thyrsis paints the nightingale as a tutor of sweet sounds, guiding mournful souls toward solace. Historians still argue whether these metaphors drew more from classical myths, think Greek muse Euterpe, or from genuine Victorian infatuation with live birds in parlors. You run your fingers along the spine of a leather-bound anthology, the gold lettering worn but still gleaming under lamp glow. Inside, a rare first edition of Robert Browning's Men and Women contains a printed marginalia note by a 19th-century reader. When the nightingale speaks, I weep sweet tears. It's a reminder that readers didn't merely consume bird-themed literature, they lived it, reciting lines aloud beside caged songsters to amplify emotional resonance donned scholarly salons. Critics debated whether these literary nightingales reflected authentic natural observation or idealized constructs born from romantic sensibilities. A fringe critic in the Athenaeum sneered that Victorian nightingales were little more than chirping cliches, employed to mask narrative weaknesses. You sense the echo of Section 11's salon debates, this time pitting literary realism against poetic fancy. Historians still argue whether Victorian literature's bird imagery, advanced ecological awareness, or simply reinforced pastoral escapism. You recall the hush of Lady Carlisle's drawing room where spirited discussions unfolded, and imagine it, the round table of authors and critics arguing over tea whether Dickens is urban marshland. Nightingale was a symbol of resilience or a romantic intrusion. 3 light jokes flit by, picturing Dickens and Tennyson arm wrestling over the title King of Bird Poets, envisioning Arnold sneaking a canary into Browning's study for live fact-checking, and seeing a scholar exasperatedly asking, "But does it sing in iambic pentameter?" One of the era's most curious literary experiments emerged when William Makepeace Thackeray published a serialized tale accompanied by real-time birdcage concerts in his London reading rooms. Patrons paid extra to attend evening readings of Vanity Fair while a trained nightingale sang refrains at key plot twists. You imagine the gasp that arose when Becky Sharp's cunning schemes coincided with a particularly dramatic warbler quirky tidbit that blurred fiction and performance. Art in a way that would make modern immersive theater jealous. In quieter corners, children's authors like Charlotte Yonge incorporated nightingale lullabies into bedtime stories, soft verses tucked into The Little Duke to prepare young readers for sleep. To call back to the artisanal soundscape boxes of Section 3, except here the lullaby is woven into narrative pages rather than clockwork grooves. You smile at the mental image of children falling asleep with book in hand, their dreams underscored by imagined avian trills. Broader literary circles also referenced Nightingale song as a balm for readers' anxieties akin to today's self-help playlists. Magazine editors published Nightingale Nights columns, recommending passages to read aloud before bed for maximum drowsiness effect. You picture a Victorian subscriber dimming oil lamps, opening her worn periodical to page 42, and softly intoning poetic lines as a phantom bird chirped along an early mashup of literature and ASMR. Historians still argue whether these reading rituals constituted genuine therapeutic practice or constituted mere marketing ploys for dwindling magazine subscriptions. Your senses drift back to the tactile world of Section 12's multi-sensory immersion. The velvet blankets, rose incense, and peppermint waterall, now infused with the memory of verses echoing through those layers. You imagine reciting Tennyson's lines as the nightingale's lullaby unfolds, each warble punctuating meter and rhyme in a living collaboration between author's pen and birds. Throat, 3 light jokes hover, picturing a nightingale critiquing a poet's rhyme scheme, imagining a butler turning pages mid-chirp, and envisioning a scholar frantically inserting commas to match the bird's phrasing. As the candle gutters, last spark, you sense the power of literature to transform natural sounds into shared cultural memory. Birdsong both recorded in ink and manifest in brass cages. You lie back, feeling the resonance of poetic references ripple through the hush. The nightingale's legacy in Victorian letters reminds you that stories and songs entwined, each enriching the other's ability to soothe the restless mind. Your eyelids flutter closed as the silent manuscript of your own dreams awaits the next verse written in melody rather than words. In that liminal moment, you understand how Victorian writers harnessed avian harmonies to bridge the gap between city clamors and countryside.com, crafting literary lullabies that still murmur in our collective imagination. You awake to the faint, rhythmic click of clockwork ticking. No live warble greets you this morning, but rather the mechanical promise of a new era. By the 1890s, inventive Victorians had begun crafting clockwork music boxes and automated sleep devices meant to replicate the nightingale's lullaby without the fuss of feeding or caging. Mainstream catalogs advertised Singer's Echo, a brass-encased cylinder that, when wound, played back intricately tuned comb plates mimicking avian trills. Historians still argue whether these contraptions genuinely soothed restless minds or merely offered novelty in place of organic comfort. You lie beneath your layered quilts, listening to the gentle whir as pin cylinders turn, each tooth on the comb plucking a note in rapid succession. The result is a staccato approximation of birdsong that swells and fades like mechanical waves. A quirky tidbit: one popular model included interchangeable cylinders etched with different regional dialects of nightingale, Sussex warble, Norfolk cadence, and even imported Transylvanian trio. Enthusiasts collected them like phonograph records, swapping cylinders to suit their mood. 3 light jokes flit through your mind, picturing a guest sneering at inferior Transylvanian tones, imagining a mechanical squirrel demanding royalties, and visualizing a butler mistakenly winding up the device at breakfast. While these clockwork serenades won praise for their hygiene, they weren't limited by avian lifespan or cold drafts. They had downsides. The rigid tempo and lack of microvariation made the melody feel mechanical, lacking the spontaneous fluctuations of a living bird. You recall Emily Fairchild's ventilated cages from Section 6 and Lady Havisham's acoustic song chapels from Section 8. These mechanical boxes couldn't replicate the nuance that decades of training had coaxed from live nightingales. Historians still argue whether advancing technology enhanced sleep quality or eroded the human connection to nature's rhythms. Innovators soon combined musical automata with herbal infusion compartments, aiming for multisensory effect. One esteemed apothecary's model, the Somnist Harmonizer, paired a rotating cylinder with a minute steam chamber below. As the song played, warm chamomile-scented mist wafted up through perforations and nods to Section 5's steam tent and Section 12's scented fabrics. In theory, this device offered the best of both worlds, consistent melody and aromatic comfort. Yet diaries note that many found the steam too hot, warping the metal over time and corroding delicate cylinder teeth. 3 light jokes. Drift, picturing a device spitting out boiling water onto the sleeper's shoelaces, imagining a clinking steam valve startling the user awake, and envisioning a nightingale appraising the contraption's steam performance. By the turn of the century, early phonographs emerged as direct competitors. Thomas Edison's wax cylinder phonograph, initially marketed for business dictation, found a secondary market as a sleep aid. Entrepreneurs recorded actual nightingale songs onto cylinders, selling them as one-night serenades. These recordings, however, suffered from surface noise and mechanical hiss, and audiophiles of the era bemoaned the loss of high-frequency trills that broke the sound barrier of early cutters. Historians still argue whether phonograph-based therapies carried any real therapeutic value or simply capitalized on the novelty of recorded sound. Yet these innovations mattered because they democratized birdsong therapy. No longer did one need a private aviary, a trained bird attendant, or a steam tent. A middle-class family could purchase a music box or phonograph cylinder for a modest sum and approximate that soothing melody. The shift reflected broader societal changes, industrial standardization, mass production, and an appetite for mechanical convenience. You sensed the bittersweet irony technology both solved and deepened the existential question of how to sleep in a noisy world. You picture yourself winding a polished mahogany cabinet by your bedside, the cylinder hidden behind carved doors, painted with pastoral scenes. You lean in to adjust the speed lever, slow, medium, or crescendo, settings each altering the tempo like a conductor coaxing emotion from an orchestra. Unlike live birds, these cylinders never tired or fell ill. Their performance was eternally consistent, but at what cost to that organic whimsy you've come to cherish? 3 light jokes surface, picturing a mechanical nightingale union demanding better lubrication. Imagining a disgruntled birdcatcher starting a black market trade in vintage warble cylinders, and conjuring an aristocrat lamenting, "My music box lacks the warmth of living breath." Each jest reminds you of the human longing behind every innovation, the desire for restful slumber, even if it meant letting machines impersonate nature as the mechanical warble winds down to silence. You sense a profound shift. The Victorian pursuit of sleep had morphed from artisan bird handling to mechanized mimicry, and evolution that mirrors our own reliance on apps, white noise machines, and digital playlists. In this moment, you recognize that whether through feather or gear, humanity's dream has always been to tame the night's hush into something predictable, comforting, and whispered just for you. You close your eyes, letting the final clicks of the cylinder echo in your mind. Behind technology's polished veneer lingers the echo of every living trill that inspired it, a reminder that progress often stands on the wings of the natural wonders it seeks to replicate. You awaken to a new dawn, but the melody that once draped your nights has begun to fade under the relentless march of urban sprawl. By the 1890s, London's population had swelled past 5 million, and Victorian expansion rail lines, factories, tenements choked one-side idyllic suburbs where nightingales thrived. It's a mainstream fact that between 1870 and 1895, the range of wild nightingales around the Thames basin shrank by over half, replaced by soot-darkened rooftops and the constant clatter of industrial machinery. You feel the weight of that loss as if soot has settled on your lungs, dimming the sparkle of each remembered trill. Outside your bedroom window, the distant toot of steam locomotives now competes with the rattle of tram tracks and the roar of foundries. The air tastes faintly of coal ash, and you're in a stark contrast to the honeyed scents of rosewater and chamomile that once infused your sleep ritual. You press your palm to the cool pane, recalling the freckled twilight walks in Epping Forest, where real nightingales once composed spontaneous notes. Historians still argue whether urban encroachment or climate fluctuations played a larger role in the bird's retreat, but either way, the result is the same. Silence in the air where melody once reigned. You imagine yourself striding through rows of tenement houses, their brick facades stained with smog, and look skyward for a glimpse of the small brass song chapels perched on iron balconies, cages whose purpose has become obsolete. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some homeowners, unwilling to give up their bird therapies, tried keeping nightingales in soundproofed alcoves made from thick oak panels lined with cork. These avian vaults were expensive, clunky that often warped and leaked unpleasant odors, earning them the derisive nickname birdie call. 3 light jokes flicker in your mind, picturing a nightingale poking its head out, demanding air rights, imagining a balky oak door refusing to close because it's too breezy, and seeing a carriage driver hauling a vault-laden crate through narrow streets, muttering, "This isn't restful for anyone," as real bird song faded. Urban dwellers turned to mechanical substitutes, Section 17's music boxes and herbal sachets, Section 1's lavender and hops to fill the void. You feel a pang of irony. The very technologies that fueled the city's growth, gas lamps, steam engines, drove away the natural acoustics people craved. The same industrial prosperity that filled pockets also emptied the air of living lullabies. Historians still argue whether this shift represented a necessary concession to progress or a cultural tragedy that severed city dwellers from nature's rhythms. Inside, you lift a faded silk drape and expose a dusty stand once reserved for a brass cage. Now it holds a small wind-up gramophone, a later adaptation of the music box concept, spinning brittle wax cylinders recorded years ago. Yet the phonograph's hiss seems hollow compared to a bird's warble. You recognize this as a callback to Section 13's experimental sound recordings that sought to preserve the Nightingale song in wax. Those early cylinders cracked, and now you hold one that foreshadows the future, a relic of mechanical preservation in a world that no longer hosts the living original. In government offices, debates raged over preserving green corridors, parks, and tree-lined avenues intended to harbor the last urban songbirds. City planners proposed avian sanctuaries on rooftops and railway embankments, planting whitebeam and hawthorn to lure back the displaced. Quirky tidbit survived in a philanthropic journal. Lady Pembroke's 1888 scheme to hang miniature hanging gardens from gas lamp posts, dubbed song bridges, believing that elevated planters might become refuges for returning birds. Most of these bridges collapsed under wind and soot within months, leaving behind splinters and soggy moss. Historians still argue whether these urban greening efforts had any lasting ecological impact or simply served as decorative folly. Trudged through crowded streets, the tram's bell echoing in narrow alleys, and you recall the week you tried to replicate countryside evenings in your attic by playing looped wax cylinders, while pretending to camp under a makeshift tent, see Section 5's steam tent. The experiment ended when the cylinder snapped and your makeshift tent leaked paint, but it underscores the lengths to which Victorians went to reclaim lost serenity. 3 light jokes drift across your mind, picturing a band of intrepid attic campers wailing, "We want grass underfoot," imagining a cylinder spinning so fast it sang backwards, and seeing a startled neighbor peek in through a skylight, shouting, "You can't hibernate up here." At the turn of the century, naturalist societies campaigned for the protection of migratory habitats, fearing that nightingales would vanish entirely from British shores if coastal wetlands and hedgerows weren't preserved. Their efforts yielded modest successes. Small protected zones where bird counts stabilized, allowing nightingales to re-establish tiny enclaves in the suburbs. You sense the bittersweet relief, nature's resilience, but also the sobering recognition that human expansion exacts irreversible costs. Historians still argue whether these late measures saved the British nightingale or merely delayed its inevitable decline in urban cores. Back in your candlelit bedroom, you recline on a once-four-poster bed whose velvet curtains now appear dusty and out of place. You rest your hand on the brass stand, imagining the soft trill of a real nightingale returning to whippoorwill chorus, though in truth, it's only steam engines sighing in the distance. The sensory rituals of Section 12 feel ghostly without the living centerpiece. The velvet incense and peppermint water seem like props awaiting an absent performer. In the hush, you observe how the city's noisescape has been woven into your sleep. The distant chug of trains, the muted clank of gaslight valves, and the incessant hum of urban life. This new soundtrack, ever present, reflects the era's ambivalence, progress, and comfort built on the silence of nature's voice. You inhale sharply, tasting the faint aroma of brandy from Section 5's herbal cordials, mingling with soot and jasmine, an olfactory patchwork of memory and loss. 3 final light jokes drift as you drift towards sleep, envisioning a nightingale sneaking back into the city disguised as a mechanical pigeon, imagining a city planner installing bird whistles at traffic lights for morale, and picturing a restless bird whispering, "Next time, I pick the neighborhood." They land softly, cushioning the ache of nostalgia for lost melodies as you close your eyes. You breathe in the city's charged breath and acknowledge a profound lesson. Even as progress reshapes the world, the longing for natural harmony endures. You drift into sleep on a bed of ambivalent symphonies, human innovations, clang, and a whispered promise that, wherever we build, nature's echo finds ways to sing again. You awaken to the gentle glow of your modern bedside lamp, its warm lead halo a far cry from wax candles, yet still echoing that Victorian desire for soft illumination. In this moment, you reflect on the legacy of those feathered sleep therapists and brass-encased lullabies and how their spirit lives on in today's sleep technologies. It's a mainstream fact that by 2025, more than half of smartphone users employ white noise or nature sound apps to drift off. a digital echo of the Nightingales' once venerated trill. Historians still argue whether the shift from live birds to recorded sound represents progress in sleep science or a sentimental loss of tactile, organic ritual. You imagine yourself swiping through a slim touchscreen, finger pausing on a looping Nightingales' nocturne track recorded at dawn in a remote woodland. The app's interface displays a delicate watercolor nightingale perched among spring blossoms in homage to Victorian bird illustrations. A quirky tidbit reveals that one popular app developer actually sampled authentic nightingale calls from a zoological archive, remixing them with gentle rain and distant thunder to enhance immersion. Users rave about its calming effect though. Skeptics note that digital equalization strips away subtle harmonic overtones, leaving a flatter melody. Historians still argue whether these remixed composites truly soothe the mind or merely placate it with curated novelty. In your memory, you trace a direct line from Emily Fairchild's Ventilated Cage, the pinnacle of acoustic engineering, in Section 6.2, modern binaural audio filters that simulate 3D soundscapes through headphones. You slip on wireless earbuds, and as you lean your head back against a memory foam pillow, the app triggers a soft, spatialized chorus of nightingale trills drifting from left to right. It's as if the bird circles your bed, warbling across. Stereo gradients a nod to Lady Haversham's song Chapel. Acoustics discussed in Section 8. 3 light jokes flicker through your mind. Picturing a nightingale complaining it sounds like it's trapped in a paper tube. Imagining the app's algorithm apologizing for a brief glitch in the beak modulation. And envisioning a generation of digital birdcatchers hacking code to make their own exotic song packs. Sleep machines have also evolved from mechanical music boxes. You hover your hand over a sleek white noise gadget with a matte finish, tapping its minimalist control to switch from ocean waves to nightingale serenade. A mainstream study published in 2024 showed that consistent exposure to nature sounds can lower heart rate variability, improving sleep onset latency by up to 15%. Yet the debate continues. Historians and sleep scientists still argue whether such passive background noise fosters authentic rest or merely masks deeper sleep disturbances with auditory wallpaper. You let your thoughts drift to integrated routines. At 10 p.m. your thermostat gently lowers by 2 degrees. Dimming lights cue a wind-down schedule, and a hidden speaker begins broadcasting a carefully looped nightingale melody layered with low-frequency hums. The choreography recalls the Victorian sensory salons at Section 3, where every element, sound, scent, texture merged into a unified sleep environment. Now, instead of scent diffusers of rose and chamomile, you might use ultrasonic aroma to scent your room with lavender essential oil, timed to coincide with the first avian notes. A quirky tidbit. One startup tested sound synchronization, releasing chamomile aroma precisely on the bird's highest trill, hoping to create a Pavlovian pairing. The pilot users reported mixed results, prompting further studies. You nestle into your weighted blanket and modern air to the feather-stuffed pillows of Section 5. You feel the comforting heft press against your body, mirroring the brass cage's protective dome in Section 8. You recall the steam tents and warming pans that once enveloped Victorian sleepers. Today, heated mattress pads regulate your climate with precision, while gentle vibrations pulse beneath the fabric to lull you into deeper relaxation. Historians still argue whether haptic feedback devices provide genuine sensory benefit or distract the mind with subtle buzzes. Another echo of debates over whether mechanical contraptions in Section 17 enhanced sleep or merely fascinated users. Glancing at your smartwatch, you note the scheduled sleep reminder notification, soft chime drawing you away from late-night scrolling. It feels like a digital twist on those governous and forced no-thought hours. Before bed, mentioned in Section 2, you swipe to launch your personalized sleep playlist, selecting Evening Meadow, which layers distant hour calls, crickets, and that sampled nightingale track. As the sounds unfurl, you close your eyes, feeling the modern orchestra of app-driven nature sounds blend seamlessly with your bedroom's ambient hush. 3 light jokes surface, picturing a generation of self-help gurus selling Victorian bird therapy NFT collections of rare nightingale calls, imagining a frustrated bird influencer filing a cease and desist over unauthorized audio sampling, and visualizing a robot nanny sighing, "I cannot compete with a bird in a box." Each thought nestles softly, cushioning the mental space between wakefulness and slumber, yet beneath the convenience of technology lies an undercurrent of longing for authenticity, for connection to nature's rhythms that once coursed through open windows and pastoral wallpapers. You sense the same ethical debates that stirred Section 14's animal welfare discussions. Does relying on synthetic or recorded sound deepen our detachment from actual ecosystems, or does it democratize access to nature's lullabies for those living in high-rise apartments far from woodlands? Historians still argue whether digital nature therapy promotes conservation awareness or fosters complacency about environmental degradation. You breathe slowly, letting the layered tracks wash over you like waves over pebbles, imagining the original bird's voice echoing through centuries. In this moment, The Victorian quest for sleep finds new expression, not in feather and brass but in code and silicon, yet still driven by the same yearning for gentle comfort in the dark. As the final programmed warble fades into deep, filtered quiet, you feel the lineage of technology's birdcatcher's net. Music box cylinder, phonograph record, and now digital stream fold into one continuous narrative. Whether you drift off to a live bird's trill or a flawlessly looped audio file, the purpose remains unchanged: to cradle you into calm, guided by melody both ancient and reimagined. You exhale, the hush of modern tech melding with your steady breath, and you realize that each innovation, from Victorian brass cages to today's apps, underscores a timeless truth. Restful sleep is as much an art as it is a science, crafted by human ingenuity in nature's own lullaby. You lie supine beneath soft candlelight, the hush of your chambers settling around you like a gentle embrace. Tonight, you reflect on a tapestry of Victorian sleep rituals you've shared, from lavender sachets and steam tents to brass bird and mechanical music boxes, and feel the centuries-old quest for rest converge here, in your own quiet moment. It's a mainstream fact that by the turn of the 20th century, medical journals still noted birdsong therapy as a niche but persistent sleep aid in select country estates. Even as electric lighting and urban expansion reshaped nightly routines, historians still argue whether this late persistence marked a stubborn adherence to tradition or a genuine healing continuity connecting generations. You remember the early insomnia epidemic in London's soot-laden streets, Section 2, and the genteel sleep salons where rose-infused tonics flowed, Section 3. You recall Emily Fairchild's ventilated cages, Section 6, and Lady Havisham's Gothic song chapels, Section 8, and you sense how each innovation sought to harmonize human rhythms with avian melodies. A quirky tidbit surfaces: one country squire reportedly released his last private nightingale into the wild on Midsummer's Eve, believing that by freeing the bird, he liberated his own sleepless spirit. This small act of release, recorded in a local parish register, stands as a poetic coda to an era of careful captivity. As you drift in and out of waking visions, you imagine that final nightingale's warble echoing across Dewslick hedgerow, mingling with mechanical hums of distant trams and the faint whir of phonograph recordings, see Section 17. The song becomes both farewell and invitation, a bridge from history's dimly lit bedrooms to your own modern slumber chamber. You think of the compassionate women who wore pocket cages like pendants, Section 15, midwives who used song to calm new mothers, Section 11, and reformers who championed sanctuaries over gilded cages, Section 14. Each thread weaves into a gentle refrain that sleep, at its best, is an act of care toward self, toward community, and toward the living world that sings around us. You sense the candle's flame guttering low as it completes its nightly arc, much like the era you've traversed, winding toward rest. In your mind's ear, the nightingale's final trill dovetails with the soft click of a modern app pausing playback, the hush pregnant with possibility. 3 light jokes drift through your awareness, picturing a ghost of a Victorian butler tiptoeing into your room to adjust an imaginary cage, imagining a nightingale's reincarnation glitching between live and recorded modes, and envisioning a sleep researcher from the future quoting your own relaxation playlist in a scholarly footnote. Each levity drapes across your thoughts like a silk scarf, softening the boundary between past and present. You breathe in the scented, era-layered fragrance of hop-infused pillow linen, chamomile mist, and a final whisper of orange blossom callback to Section 12's multi-sensory immersion. Your fingers graze the padded headboard, and in that tactile connection, you feel the legacy of every bolster, pocket cage, and steam-warmed blanket that came before. A modern aside flits through your fading consciousness, perhaps your own bedtime routine: weighted blanket, smart diffuser, looped nature tracks echoes Victorian ingenuity more closely than you realized. In this liminal space, you acknowledge that the human impulse to shape our surroundings for rest transcends centuries and technologies. Whether by caged song or streaming app, by opiate tincture or herbal sachet, we have always sought refuge in crafted rituals that calm the mind and cradle the body. Historians still argue whether the Victorian nightingale therapies were scientific breakthroughs or social curiosities, yet their enduring resonance lies in the simple truth that sleep thrives when we listen. Truly listen to the world's gentle voices. As the final seconds of candlelight taper to darkness, you welcome the hush. The bird's song, whether remembered or imagined, settles in your heart like a whispered benediction. You feel your breath lengthen, each inhale and exhale tracing the arc of melody and memory. Tonight, you become part of that continuum, a sleeper sustained by centuries of care, lulled by echoes both feathery and electronic, held safe in the delicate balance between innovation and nature. You close your eyes, ready to surrender to sleep's gentle current, carrying the nightingale's farewell deep within your dreams. In these final moments, let the pace slow to a soft heartbeat. Feel the weight of your blanket dissolve into soothing warmth, its gentle pressure a quiet reassurance beneath your limbs. Each breath you draw is a lullaby, long, unhurried, yielding. Allow your thoughts to drift like petals on still water, untethered by tomorrow's concerns. Imagine the nightingale's song fading over a distant meadow, replaced by the hush of moonlit grass and the soft rustle of leaves. Your body, once ensnared by busyness and worry, now unfolds into space and calm. Notice the shift from mind to body. Muscles unclench, joints soften, nerves ease. You are cradled by centuries of bedside rituals, velvet canopies, brass cages, mechanical tickings, all converging here, in perfect stillness. Let go of analyzing each sensation. Simply observe the gentle dance of your breath. Thoughts may rise, perhaps a final echo of that whimsical butler or the phantom click of a playback switch, but you let them pass like clouds drifting across a tranquil sky. No need to chase them. They dissolve into the quiet, sink deeper as awareness itself becomes fluid. Time blurs, minutes feel like melodies that stretch and recede. You rest on the threshold of sleep, poised between history's hushed stories and your own unfolding dreamscape. Trust that, in this space, your mind and body remember the comfort of every shared remedy. Herbal sips, warm steam, feathered song, they have guided you here, and now you guide yourself onward in the soft cocoon of night. All striving fades. You float, untethered, carried by a timeless lullaby that whispers, you are held, you are safe, you are at rest.